Lucky Jim by Kingsley Amis. They made a silly mistake, though, the Professor of History said, and his smile as Dixon watched gradually sank beneath the surface of his features at the memory. After the interval, we did a little piece by Dowland for recorder and keyboard, you know. I played the recorder, of course, and young Johns played the piano. Well, anyway, the reporter chap must have got the story wrong, or not been listening or something. Anyway, there it was in the Post, as large as life. Dowland, yes, they'd got him right. Messrs. Welsh and Johns, yes. But what do you think they said then? Dixon shook his head. Flute and piano. Oh? Flute and piano, not recorder and piano. Welsh laughed briefly. Now, a recorder, you know, isn't like a flute. As Welsh slowed even further in his walk, Dixon relaxed at his side. He'd found his professor standing, surprisingly enough, in front of the recent editions shelf in the college library, and they were now moving diagonally across a small lawn towards the front of the main building of the college. To look at, but not only to look at, they resembled some kind of variety act, Welsh tall and weedy with limp whitening hair, Dixon on the short side, fair and round-faced, with an unusual breadth of shoulder. Then there was the most marvellous mix-up in the piece they did just before the interval. The young fellow playing the viola had the misfortune to turn over 2 pages at once, and the resulting confusion, my word. Quickly deciding on his own word, Dixon said it to himself and then tried to flail his features into some sort of response to humour. Welsh was talking yet again about his concert. How had he become Professor of History, even in a place like this? By published work? No. By extra good teaching? No, in italics. Then how? As usual, Dixon shelved this question, telling himself that what mattered was that this man had decisive power over his future, at any rate until the next 4 or 5 weeks were up. Until then he must try to make Welsh like him, and one way of doing that was, he supposed, to be present and conscious, while Welsh talked about concerts. Abruptly, with no warning, the second of Dixon's 2 predicaments flapped up into his consciousness. Shuddering in his efforts to repress a yawn of nervousness, he asked in his flat northern voice, "How's Margaret these days?" The other's clay-like features changed indefinably as his attention, like a squadron of slow old battleships, began wheeling to face this new phenomenon, and in a moment or two he was able to say, "Margaret? Yes, I've not seen her for a week or 2. Oh, she's recovering very quickly, I think, all things considered. She took a very nasty knock, of course, over that catchpole fellow and all the unfortunate business afterwards. But I know she'd like to get down to things again, and I must say I agree. It would help to take her mind off. Dixon knew all this, and very much better than Welsh could hope to, but he felt constrained to say, "Yes, I see. I think living with you, Professor, and Mrs. Welsh must have helped her a lot to get out of the wood." "Yes, I think there must be something about the atmosphere of the place, you know. There's some sort of healing effect. I remember—" After no more than a minor swerve, the misfiring vehicle of his conversation had been hauled back onto its usual course. Dixon gave up, stiffening his legs as they reached at last the steps of the main building. Welsh said he had to go up and collect his bag from his room, which was on the 2nd floor. While he waited, Dixon considered how, without provoking Welsh into a long-lived, wondering frown, he could remind him of his invitation to come and eat tea at the Welshes' house outside the city. They'd arranged to leave at 4 o'clock in Welsh's car, and it was now 10 past. Dixon felt apprehension lunging at his stomach as he thought of seeing Margaret, whom he was to take out that evening for the first time since she'd cracked up. He'd been drawn into the Margaret business by a combination of virtues he hadn't known he possessed: politeness, friendly interest, ordinary concern, and a good-natured willingness to be imposed upon. It had seemed only natural for a female lecturer to ask a junior, though older, male colleague up to her place for coffee, and no more than civil to accept. Then suddenly he'd become the man who was going round with Margaret, and somehow competing with this catchpole, a background figure of fluctuating importance. He'd thought a couple of months earlier that Catchpole was coming along nicely, taking the strain off him, reducing him to the sustainable role of consulting tactician. He'd even rather enjoyed the assumption that he knew something of how these campaigns were conducted. And then Catchpole had thrown her over, right over onto his lap. Where was Welsh? The old man was well known for an incurable evader. Dixon flung himself up the staircase and along the deserted corridors, but the familiar low-ceilinged room was empty. He clattered down the back stairs, an escape route he often used himself, and into the staff cloakroom. Welsh was in there, stooped secretively over a wash-basin. "Ah, just caught you," Dixon said convivially. "Thought you'd gone without me, Professor." The other raised his narrow face, distorted with wonder. "Gone?" he asked. "You're taking me home for tea. We arranged it on Monday." "Oh," Welsh said, and looked at Dixon, like an African savage being shown a simple conjuring trick. "Oh, did we say this afternoon?" "That's right, Professor. Hope it's still convenient." "Oh, yes, it's convenient enough." "Good," Dixon said. "I'm looking forward to it," and took his dirty old raincoat from a hook in the wall. Welsh's manner was still a little veiled, but he was obviously recovering quickly, and managed quite soon to pick up his bag and put his fawn fishing hat on his head. "We'll go down in my car," he offered. "That'll be nice." Outside the building they turned along a gravel drive and went up to the car where it was parked with a few others. Dixon stared about him while Welsh looked thoroughly for his keys. How had the bad impression he'd made so far in the college and his department come about? The most likely thing, Dixon always thought, was that essay written for Welsh by one of the honours people, containing, in fact consisting of, abuse of a book on enclosures by, it transpired, one of Welsh's own ex-pupils. I asked him who could possibly have filled his head with stuff like that, you see, and he said it was all out of one of your lectures, Dixon. Well, I told him as tactfully as I could. Much later Dixon had found out that the book in question had been written at Welsh's suggestion, and in part under his advice. These facts had been there for all to read in the acknowledgements, but Dixon, whose policy it was to read as little as possible of any given book, never bothered with these, and it had been Margaret who'd told him. That had been as near as he could remember, on the morning before the evening when Margaret had tried to kill herself with sleeping pills. When Welsh said in a faraway half-shout over the noise of the car engine starting up, "Oh, by the way, Dixon," Dixon turned to him with real avidity. "Yes, Professor?" How much better to have more of what Welsh could provide than thoughts of what Margaret would provide. "I've been wondering if you'd care to come over next weekend for the, weekend. We're having a few people from London, you know, friends of ours and of my son Bertrand's. I expect we shall put on one or two little shows, little bits of music and that. We'll probably call on you to lend a hand with something." The car was buzzing along a clear road by now. "Oh, thank you very much, Professor. I should love to," Dixon said, thinking he must get Margaret to do some intelligence work on the something he'd probably be called upon to lend a hand with. Welsh seemed quite cheered up by this ready acceptance. "That's fine. Now, there's something on the academic side I'd like to discuss with you. I've been talking to the principal about the college open week at the end of term. He wants the history department to throw something into the pool, you see, and I've been wondering about you." "Oh, really?" Surely there were others better qualified to be thrown into the pool. "Yes, I thought you might care to tackle the evening lecture the department's going to provide, if you could." "Well, I'd rather like to have a crack at a public lecture, if you think I'm capable of it," Dixon managed to say. "I thought something like Merry England might do as a subject. Not too academic and not too, Do you think you could get something together along those sort of lines?" Margaret Peel, small, thin and bespectacled, with bright make-up, glanced at Dixon with a half-smile. And then, just before I went under, I suddenly stopped caring. I'd been clutching the empty bottle like grim death, I remember, as if I were holding on to life, in a way. But quite soon I didn't in the least mind going. I felt too tired somehow. Curious sensation. They were sitting in the oak lounge of a large roadside hotel not far from Welshes' house. "It's a good sign that you're able to talk about it like this," Dixon said. Since she made no reply, he went on. "What happened afterwards? Or can't you remember? Don't tell me if you'd rather not, of course." "No, I don't mind telling you if it won't bore you." Her smile broadened a little. "But didn't Wilson tell you about how he found me?" "Wilson? Oh, the chap in the room underneath. Yes, he said about hearing your wireless booming away and coming up to complain. What made you leave it on like that?" She looked away across the half-empty bar. "I don't really know, James," she said. "I think I had some idea about wanting to have some sort of noise going on while I was, going off. It seemed so horribly quiet in that room." She gave a little shiver. "Bit chilly in here, isn't it?" "Well, move if you like." "No, it's all right. Just a bit of draught with that chap coming in." "Oh, yes. Afterwards." I think I grasped quite soon what was going on and where I was and all that, and what they were doing to me. I thought, oh God, hours and hours of feeling ill and wretched, can I bear it? But everybody was awfully sweet to me. Dixon half listened for a minute or so, while Margaret described how good Mrs. Welsh had been to her in fetching her from the hospital and installing her at the Welshes' home to convalesce. She had undoubtedly been very kind to Margaret, even though at other times, when publicly disagreeing with her husband, for example, she was the only living being capable of making Dixon sympathize with him. It was rather annoying to hear how kind she'd been. It entailed putting tiresome qualifications on his dislike for her. Finally, Dixon said in a low voice, having first drunk freely from his glass, "You needn't say anything if you don't want to, but you are over this business now, aren't you? You wouldn't think of having another shot at it, I mean." She glanced up quickly as if she'd been expecting to be asked this. "No, I wouldn't have another shot at it. I don't care about him any more." "Has he tried to get in touch with you or anything?" "Not a thing. Not even so much as a phone message. I suppose he's been too busy with his popsy these days, like he said he'd be." "Oh, he said that, did he?" "Oh, yes. Our Mr. Catchpole was never one to beat about the bush." She smiled a little smile which he recognized with self-dislike as consciously brave, then drained her glass with a quick, gay movement. "Beer," she said. "Buy me beer." While he was getting the drinks, Dixon thought of the morning before Margaret had taken her overdose. He'd had nothing to do at college that day, and she'd been free after a tutorial at 10. After coffee in a restaurant, they'd gone to a chemist's, where she'd wanted to buy a few things. One of the things had been a new bottle of the sleeping pills. He could remember exactly how she'd looked, dropping the bottle into her handbag and glancing up to say, "If you've got nothing better to do tonight, I'll be brewing up about 10. What about dropping in for an hour?" He'd said he would, meaning to turn up, but in the event he hadn't been able to get away. In the early evening, Catchpole had called on Margaret to tell her he was finished with her, and at about 10 she'd eaten the whole bottleful of pills. If he'd been there himself, Dixon thought now for the 1000th time, he'd have been able to prevent her, or if too late for that, to get her to the hospital a good hour and a half earlier than the fellow Wilson had. Pocketing his change now, Dixon took the drinks over to Margaret. "Neddy said something about you feeling ready to start work again soon," he said. "Are you going to do anything at college before the exams start?" "Well, I shall see each of my classes once to answer any questions they may think worth putting, but I shan't do anything more than that this year, apart from marking the scripts. What'll really bring me back to normality will be getting away from the Neddys, ungrateful as it may sound." She crossed her legs spasmodically. "How much longer are you thinking of staying there?" "Oh, not more than a fortnight, I hope." "Oh, that's good," Dixon said, his spirits rising. "You'll be there next weekend, then?" "Oh, what, for Neddy's Arty get-together? Yes, of course. What, you don't mean you're coming too, do you?" "Yes, that's just what I do mean. The question was popped on the way down in the car. Why, what's so funny? Margaret was laughing in a way Dixon had provisionally named to himself the tinkle of tiny silver bells. He sometimes thought that the whole corpus of her behaviour derived from translating such phrases into action, but before he could feel much irritation with himself or her, she said, "You know what you're in for, do you?" She ticked the items off on her fingers. Part songs, a play reading, a chamber concert. There's something else too, but I've forgotten it. I'll remember in a minute, she went on, laughing. "Oh, don't bother, that's enough to be going on with. My God, this is really serious. Neddy must be going off his head at last. It's absolutely fantastic. Nobody'll come." "You're wrong there, I'm afraid. A chap from the third programme's promised to turn up, and a camera team from Picture Post. Several of the more prominent local musicians will appear, and of course Bertrand will be there with his girl. The girl might be rather interesting. A ballet student, I gather." "A ballet student? I didn't know there were such things." "Well, there are, apparently. This one's called Sonia Loosemore." "No, really? How do you know all this?" "I've heard nothing else from either of the Neddys for the last week." "I can imagine that." Dixon began looking towards the barmaid. "Look, Margaret, you know as well as I do that I can't sing, I can't act. I can hardly read, and thank God I can't read music. You'll have to start finding out what Neddy's got lined up for me, so I can start thinking up reasons for not being able to do it." She laid her hand on his. "You can rely on me," she said in a soft voice. "But don't let's talk about it any more. Can't we talk about ourselves? We've got so much to say to each other, haven't we?" "Yes, of course," he said, trying to stuff comradeliness into his tone. He brought out his cigarettes, and while lighting two of these, he meditated on Margaret's capacity of talking like this at no notice. He wanted to give an inarticulate shout and run out of the bar, not stopping until he was on board a city bus. Instead, he excused himself and went out to the lavatory. Out there, he thought how nice it would be if he could give up his dual role of conciliator and go right away from here. Once again he was visited unbearably by the visual image that had haunted him ever since he took on this job. He seemed to be looking from a darkened room across a deserted back street to where, against a dimly glowing evening sky, a line of chimney pots stood out as if carved from tin. He was certain it was an image of London, and just as certain that it wasn't of any part of London he'd ever visited. He hadn't spent more than a dozen evenings there in his life. And why, he pondered, was his ordinary desire to leave the provinces for London, sharpened and particularized by this half-glimpsed scene. He walked thoughtfully out of the lavatory without bothering to close its door, which was fitted with a compressed air delaying device. The cylinder of this having been unscrewed by some rioter, the door swung to at once behind him, just missing his rear heel. The effect in that short and narrow passage was like the discharge of a piece of ordnance. He seemed to catch a hoarse cry of alarm from inside the bar. More than ever, it was the moment to dart into the street and fail to return. But economic necessity and the call of pity were a strong combination. Topped up by fear, as both were, they were invincible. He went back through the polished door into the oak lounge. "Of course, this sort of music's not intended for an audience, you see," Welsh said as he handed the copies round. "The fun's all in the singing. Everybody's got a real tune to sing, a real tune. You could say, really, that polyphony got to its highest point, its peak, at that period. We're all waiting, Ned," Mrs. Welsh said from the piano. She played a slow arpeggio, sustaining it with the pedal. "All right, everybody?" A soporific droning filled the air round Dixon as the singers hummed their notes to one another. Mrs. Welsh rejoined them on the low platform that had been built at one end of the music-room, taking up her stand by Margaret, the other soprano. A small, bullied-looking woman with unabundant brown hair was the only contralto. Next to Dixon was Cecil Goldsmith, a colleague of his in the college history department, whose tenor voice held enough savage power, especially above middle C, to obliterate whatever noises Dixon might feel himself impelled to make. Behind him and to one side were the three basses. The madrigal began at the bidding of Welsh's arthritic forefinger. Dixon kept his head down and moved his mouth as little as possible, consistent with being unmistakably seen to move it. At the end of the song, everyone seemed pleased with the performance and anxious for another of the same sort. "Yes, well, this next one's what they call a ballet. Now, if you'll all just—" An irregular knocking at the door at the far end of the room was at once followed by the bursting open of this door and the entry of a tall man wearing a lemon-yellow sports coat topped by a blue berry and displaying a large beard, which came down further on one side than the other. Dixon guessed that this must be the pacifist painting Bertrand, whose arrival with his girl had been heralded by Welsh every few minutes since tea-time. The senior Welshes left their posts and went to greet their son, followed more slowly by the others, who, perhaps finding the chance of a break not completely unwelcome, broke into conversation as they moved. Dixon delightedly lit a cigarette, and finding himself alone, moved down the room through the company and leaned against the wall at the end by the door. Placed there, he was in a good position to observe Bertrand's girl when she came in, slowly and hesitantly, a few seconds later. In a few more seconds, Dixon had noticed all he needed to notice about this girl. The combination of fair hair, straight and cut short, with brown eyes and no lipstick, the strict set of the mouth and the square shoulders, the large breast and the narrow waist, the premeditated simplicity of the wine-coloured corduroy skirt and the unornamented white linen blouse. The notion that women like this were never on view except as the property of men like Bertrand was so familiar to him that it had long since ceased to appear an injustice. The huge class that contained Margaret was destined to provide his own womenfolk, those in whom the intention of being attractive could sometimes be made to get itself confused with the performance. The girl turned her head and found Dixon staring at her. They looked at each other for a moment, until just as Dixon's scalp was beginning to tingle, a high, baying voice called, "Ah, there you are, darling. Step this way, if you please, and be introduced to the throng," and Bertrand strode up the room to meet her. Dixon had been too distressed at the sight of Bertrand's girl to want to be introduced to her, and kept out of the way for a time. But eventually Welsh came up to him and said, inexplicably enough, "Ah, Dixon, come along now. I want you to meet my son Bertrand and his come along." With Margaret at his side, Dixon was soon confronted by the two people Welsh wanted him to meet. "This is Mr. Dixon and Miss Peel," Welsh said, and drew away Cecil Goldsmith and his wife. Before a silence could fall, Margaret said, "Are you down here for long, Mr. Welsh?" Bertrand pondered for a moment. "I doubt it," he said at last. "Upon consideration, I feel it incumbent upon me to doubt it. I have miscellaneous concerns in London that need my guiding hand, but it's very pleasant to come down here and know that the torch of culture is still in a state of combustion in the provinces." "And how's your work going?" Margaret asked. "My work?" Bertrand laughed. "You make it sound like missionary activity. Not that some of our friends would dissent from that description of their labours. Fred, for instance," he turned to his girl. "Yes, or possibly Otto," she replied. "Most assuredly Otto." "What work do you do?" Dixon asked flatly. "I'm a painter. Not, alas, a painter of houses, or I should have been able to make my pile and retire by now. No. I paint pictures, mere pictures, or, as our American cousins would say, pictures, period." "And what work do you do? Always provided, of course, that I have permission to ask." Dixon hesitated. Bertrand's speech had annoyed him in more ways than he'd have believed possible. "I'm one of your father's underlings. I cover the medieval angle for the history department here." "Charming, charming," Bertrand said, and his girl said, "You enjoy doing that, do you?" Welsh, Dixon noticed, had rejoined the group. He said, quietly but quickly, "Well, of course, it has its own appeal. I can quite see that it hasn't the sort of glamour of," he turned to the girl, "your line of country." She looked perplexedly up at Bertrand. "But I haven't noticed much glamour knocking about in—" "Well, surely," Dixon said. "I know there must be a lot of hard work and exercise attached to it, but the ballet— well—" He disregarded a nudge from Margaret. "There must be plenty of glamour there." As he spoke, he gave Bertrand a smile of polite, comradely envy. Bertrand was going red in the face and was leaning towards him, struggling to swallow half a bridge roll and speak. The girl repeated with genuine bewilderment, "The ballet? But I work in a bookshop. Whatever made you think that I... Look here, Dickinson, or whatever your name is, Bertrand began. Perhaps you think you're being funny, but I'd as soon you cut it out if you don't mind. Don't want to make a thing of it, do we? The baying quality of his voice, especially in the final query, made Dixon want to call attention to its defects, also perhaps to the peculiarity of his eyes, which seemed to lack the convexity of normal eyeballs. But in the ensuing silence, Dixon swiftly decided to back down. He'd made some mistake about the girl. He mustn't make things any worse. I'm terribly sorry if I've made a mistake, but I was under the impression that Miss Loosemore here had something to do with... He turned to Margaret for aid. But before she could speak, Welsh came in loudly with, "Poor old Dixon! You must have been confusing this young lady with Sonia Loosemore, a friend of Bertrand's who let us all down rather badly some time ago. I think Bertrand must have thought you were twitting him or something, Dixon." "Well, if he'd taken the trouble to be introduced, this wouldn't have happened," Bertrand said, still flushed, instead of which he... "Don't worry about it, Mr. Dixon. It was only a silly little misunderstanding. I can quite see how it happened. My name's Christine Callahan. Altogether different, you see." "Well, I'm very sorry. I really am." No, don't let it get you down, Dixon," Bertrand said with a glance at his girl. "If you'll excuse us, I think we might circulate round the company." They moved off towards the goldsmith group, and Dixon was left alone with Margaret. "Here, have a cigarette," she said. "You must be needing one. God, what a swine Bertrand is. He must have realized... It was my fault, really," Dixon said, grateful for nicotine and support. "I should have been there to be introduced, but I sort of couldn't face meeting him. How often have you met him?" "He came down once before with the Loosemore girl. Only a couple of days ago. Neddy gave me a long harangue about when the wedding was coming off, so as far as he knew... Look, Margaret, can't we go out for a drink? I need one. We shan't get one here." Margaret laughed so that he could see a large number of her teeth, one canine flecked with lipstick. "Oh, James, you're incorrigible," she said. "Whatever next? Of course we can't go out. What do you suppose the Neddys would think? Just as their brilliant sons arrived, you'd get a week's notice like a shot." Dixon laughed too, trying to forget about the beer. "Pretty girl, that Christine, what's her name?" Margaret said. "Yes, isn't she? Not often you get a figure as good as that, with a good-looking face." "No." Dixon tensed himself for the inevitable qualification. "Pity she's so refined, though. Bit of a prig, too." Dixon, who'd arrived at similar conclusions already, found he didn't much want to have them confirmed in this way. "Oh, I don't know," he said. "Can't really tell at this stage." This was greeted with a tinkle of tiny bells. "Aha, you always were one for a pretty face, weren't you? Covers a multitude, is what I always say." He thought this profoundly true, and debarred from saying so, was at a loss what to reply. They looked anxiously at each other, as if whatever either might say next must be an insult. Finally Dixon said, "Yes, she does seem rather as if she's tarred with the same brush as Bertrand." She gave him a curious sardonic smile. "I should say they've got a lot in common." "I imagine so." A maidservant was now collecting the used crockery, and the company was moving about. The next stage of the evening was clearly imminent. At Welsh's summons, Dixon left Margaret to help arrange some chairs. "What's the next item on the programme, Professor?" he asked. "Just one or two instrumental items." "Oh, that'll be nice." He returned to Margaret to find her in conversation with Carol Goldsmith. This woman, aged about 40, thin, with long straight brown hair, Dixon regarded as one of his allies, though sometimes she overawed him a little with her mature air. "Hello, Jim, how's it going?" she asked in her abnormally clear voice. "Badly. There's at least an hour of scraping and blowing in front of us." "Yes, that's badly all right, isn't it? Why do we come to this sort of thing?" "Well, I know why you come, Jim, and poor Margaret's living here. I suppose what I mean is, why the hell do I come?" "Oh, wifely support for your spouse, I take it," Margaret said. "Something in that, I suppose. Why does he come? There aren't even any drinks." "James has already noticed that." "It would hardly be worth coming just to meet the great painter, would it?" Dixon said, meaning to start a conversation that might diminish his retrospective embarrassment over the recent Loosemore-Callahan imbroglio. For a reason he didn't then understand, the reception of this remark was perceptibly unfavourable. Margaret looked at him with lifted chin as if ready to reprove some indiscretion, and Carol half closed her eyes and smoothed her straight hair. "What makes you say that?" she said. "Oh, nothing really," Dixon said in alarm. "I had a little brush with him just now, that's all. Nothing drastic." "Oh, that's quite typical," Carol said. "He always thinks he's being got at. He often is, too." "Oh, you know him, do you?" Dixon said. "Oh, I'm sorry, Carol. Is he a great pal of yours?" "Hardly that. We saw a bit of him last summer, you know, Cecil and I, before you got your job. He can be quite entertaining at times, actually." A great baying laugh made all three turn round. Bertrand, leading Goldsmith by the arm, was approaching. The remnants of his laughter still trickling from his face, he said to Carol, "Ah, there you are, dear girl. And how are things with you?" "Well enough, thank you, dear man. I can see how things are with you. A bit out of your usual run, isn't she?" "Christine? Ah, now there's a grand girl for you. A grand girl." "Any plans for her?" Carol pursued, smiling slightly. "Plans? No. At the moment, quite frankly, she's made me more than a little piqued." Bertrand made a circle of thumb and forefinger to emphasize this last word. "How's that, Bertrand?" Goldsmith asked solicitously. "Well, as you may imagine, despite my passionate interest in this kind of sport," he nodded towards the piano, "it isn't quite enough to draw me down here unaided, glad as I am to see you all. No. I'd been promised a meeting with one Julius Gore Urquhart, of whom you may have heard." Dixon had indeed heard of Gore Urquhart, a rich devotee of the arts who had a house in the neighbourhood and who was a fish that Welsh had more than once vainly tried to land. Dixon looked again at Bertrand's eyes. They really were extraordinary. It seemed as if a sheet of some patent material were tacked to the inside of his face, showing only its two arbitrary loopholes. What could a man with such eyes, such a beard, have to do with a man like Gore Urquhart? He learned what they had to do with each other in the next minute or two. As yet, the connection was tenuous. The Callaghan girl, who knew Gore Urquhart's family, or was even perhaps his niece, had arranged to introduce Bertrand to him during the current weekend. At some late stage it had been found that Gore Urquhart was at present in Paris, so that a further visit to this part of the world would have to be undertaken to meet him. And what was Gore Urquhart going to do for Bertrand when they did meet? When Margaret had asked for this information in her circumlocutory way, Bertrand looked from face to face before replying. "I have it on more than ordinarily good authority," he said in measured tones, "that our influential friend will shortly be declaring his private secretaryship vacant. I doubt whether the post will be publicly competed for, and so I'm at the moment busily engaged in grooming myself for the part. Patronage, you see, patronage. That's what it'll be. I'll answer his letters with one hand and paint with the other." He gave a laugh in which Goldsmith and Margaret joined. "When do you think you'll be down again, then, old boy?" Goldsmith asked. "We'll have to fix something up." "Oh, in a fortnight or so, I expect. Miss Callaghan and I have another engagement for next weekend." "The weekend after's the summer ball," Margaret cut in. "Will you be coming again this year, Mr. Welsh?" "I might manage it, I suppose. I remember being not unentertained last time." At the other end of the long, low, softly lit room, the door opened, and the Callaghan woman came in. For so well-built a girl, Dixon thought that she moved awkwardly. "Ah, my dear," Bertrand said with a gallant bow, "we were just discussing Mr. Gore Urquhart, and wondering whether he'd be available the weekend after next, there being a species of dancing festivity at the college during that time. Can you enlighten us, I wonder?" "Well, his secretary said he'd probably be in Paris till the middle of next month." "Oh, well, it'll have to be another time, won't it?" Bertrand didn't appear at all put out by this news. "I've written to Uncle, asking him to let me know when he's coming back." Dixon wanted to laugh at this. It always amused him to hear girls refer to Uncle, Daddy, and so on, as if there were only one uncle or daddy in the world. "I was reading about your uncle only recently, Miss Callaghan," Margaret said. "He was presenting some watercolours to our gallery here. Yes, he is very generous. It's a good job there are some people still about who can afford to be." "Well, there won't be much longer, I fear, if the lads at Transport House go on running our lives for us," Bertrand cut in. "The thing is that the rich play an essential role in modern society. They're charming, they're generous, and their houses are full of beautiful things. That's why I don't think they should be soaked." The group began to dissolve, but before he moved himself, he said, his eyes on Dixon, "That's quite clear, is it?" This speech annoyed Dixon. He said angrily, "Oh, yes, but you'd better make the most of them while you've got them, because you won't have them much longer, you know." He began to follow Margaret, but the Callahan girl halted him by saying, "I'd rather you didn't talk in that strain, if you don't mind." Dixon looked about him. The rest of the company was seated. Dropping into the nearest chair, Dixon said in a lowered voice, "You say you'd rather I didn't talk in that strain?" "Yes, if you don't mind." She and Bertrand also sat down. "I always get a bit irritated by that sort of thing. I'm sorry, I can't do anything about it. It's just a thing about me, I'm afraid." If Dixon hadn't learnt to dislike this argument when offered by Margaret, he probably wouldn't have answered as he did. "Seen anybody about it yet?" Bertrand leaned over towards Dixon. "What the hell do you mean?" he asked in a loud undertone. "Who's your alienist?" Dixon said, broadening his field of fire. "Look here, Dixon, you're talking as if you want a bloody good punch on the nose, aren't you?" Dixon, when moved, was bad at ordering his thoughts. "Well, if I did, you don't think you're the one to give me one, do you?" Bertrand screwed up his face at this enigma. "What?" "Do you know what you look like in that beard?" Dixon's heart began to race as he switched to simplicity. "All right, come outside for a bit." Dixon got up and tiptoed to the door. Bertrand half rose to follow, but his girl stopped him. Before Dixon could reach the door, it opened and Welsh entered. "Oh," he said, "aren't you going to stay for the P. Racine fricka?" "Shan't be long, Professor. I think I'll just—" Dixon made some gestures meant to be indecipherable. "I'll be back." He shut the door on Welsh's long-lived, wondering frown. "He was going down grade, making 90 miles an hour, when his whistle began to scream," Dixon sang. He broke off, panting. It was hard work walking up the dry, sandy track to the Welshes' house, especially with so much beer distributed about his frame. Rebounding painfully from the gatepost, he began creeping round the cobble environs of the house. The large, long room at the back, where the music had been going on, was in darkness. That was good. Further round, however, where the drawing-room was, there were lights, and he soon found out voices in conversation. Peering through a chink in the curtains, he saw Welsh in his fishing hat just going out of the door, followed by Cecil Goldsmith, both of them dressed in raincoats. People were evidently about to be driven home. Carol, in light tweed coat, stayed for a moment to exchange a last remark with Bertrand. Nobody else was in the room. Dixon couldn't catch the words now spoken by Bertrand. He could tell from their intonation, however, that they formed a question, to which Carol said, "Yes, all right." At this, Bertrand stepped forward and put his arms round her. Dixon couldn't see what followed because Bertrand had his back to the window, but if there was a kiss, it lasted only a moment. Carol freed herself and hurried out. Bertrand went too. Dixon went back to the music room and got in through the French window. What he'd seen had disturbed him in some way he couldn't tie down, but he thrust the matter from his mind. All his attention would be needed for the operation of getting up to his bedroom undetected. He creaked up the stairs and across the landing. Through some architectural vagary, his bedroom could only be approached by way of a large bathroom, the outer door of which he now tried to open. Nothing happened. The bathroom was evidently occupied. Dixon stood well back and raised his hands like a conductor on the brink of some thunderous overture, then half conductor, half boxer, went into a brief manic flurry of obscene gestures. Just then somebody opened a door on the other side of the landing. "James, what on earth are you doing?" Never had Dixon been so glad to see Margaret rather than anyone else. "Shh," he said. "Get me away from here." He liked her even more when she beckoned to him and led him without more words into her bedroom. "Well, where have you been all the evening, James?" While he told her, he commented adversely to himself on her resentful expression and manner, which soon overrode his feelings of relief. What would this sort of thing be like if they ever got married? At the same time, he had to admit that she looked at her best in the blue dressing-gown, her brown hair, tawny in places, loosed from its pins and rolls. Afterwards, he could never quite work out why he did what he did next, which was sitting down beside Margaret on the bed, putting his arm round her shoulders and kissing her firmly on the mouth. Whatever his motives, the blue dressing-gown, the uncoiled hair, the pints of local bitter, the effects were unequivocal. She put her arms round his neck and kissed him back with zeal. He kissed her again, harder, and felt his head spin. Her breath was soft and warm on his cheek, and his desire suddenly strengthened. He moved a hand under her nightdress and made a movement not only quite unambiguous, but even perhaps rather insolently frank. Margaret's response to it, though violent, was hard to interpret. Without hesitation, Dixon advanced further. There was a brief rolling struggle, when he found himself flung sideways with enough vigour to bring his head with a brisk report into contact with the bed's footboard. Margaret got up and adjusted her dressing gown. "Go on," she said. "Out you go, James." He struggled to his feet. "I'm sorry, what's the matter?" "Out." She opened the door and gestured with her head. Feet were mounting the stairs to the landing. "Look, there's somebody." He found himself bundled out, his head spinning in a new direction. Halfway to the bathroom, he was confronted by the Callahan woman. "Good evening," he said politely. She looked away and went past him to her room. He tried to open the bathroom door. It was again locked. Without thinking, he threw back his head, filled his lungs, and let loose a loud and prolonged bray of rage. Then he clumped down the stairs and went into the dining room and genuflected in front of the fake, or possibly genuine, 18th century sideboard. In a moment he'd taken a bottle of port from among the sherry, beer and cider which filled half a shelf inside. The cork came out with a festive Yuletide pop which made him wish he'd some nuts and raisins. He drank deeply. Some of the liquor coursed refreshingly down his chin and under his shirt collar. The bottle had been about 3/4 full when he started and was about 3/4 empty when he stopped. He thumped and clinked it back into position, wiped his mouth on the sideboard runner, and feeling really splendid, gained his bedroom without opposition. Dixon was alive again. Consciousness was upon him before he could get out of the way. He lay sprawled, too wicked to move, spewed up like a broken spider crab on the tarry shingle of the morning. During the night he'd somehow been on a cross-country run, and had then been expertly beaten up by secret police. He felt bad. He reached out for and put on his glasses. At once he saw that there was something wrong with the bedclothes. Endangering his chance of survival, he sat up a little, and what met his bursting eyes roused to a frenzy the timpanist in his head. A large irregular area of the turned-back part of the sheet was missing. A small, but still considerable area of the turned-back part of the blanket was missing. An area about the size of the palm of his hand in the main part of the top blanket was missing. Through the 3 holes, which appropriately enough had black borders, he could see a dark brown mark on the second blanket. He ran a finger round a bit of the hole in the sheet, and when he looked at his finger it bore a dark grey stain. That meant ash. Ash meant burning. Burning must mean cigarettes. Had this cigarette burnt itself out on the blanket? If not, where was it now? Nowhere on the bed, nor in it. He leaned over the side, gritting his teeth. A sunken brown channel, ending in a fragment of discoloured paper, lay across a light patch in the pattern of a valuable-looking rug. This made him feel very unhappy. A feeling sensibly increased when he looked at the bedside table. This was marked by 2 black, charred grooves, greyish and shiny in parts, lying at right angles and stopping well short of the ashtray, which held a single-used match. Had he done all this himself, or had a wayfarer, a burglar, camped out in his room? He thought that on the whole he must have done it himself and wished he hadn't. Surely this would mean the loss of his job, especially if he failed to go to Mrs. Welsh and confess what he'd done, and he knew already that he wouldn't be able to do that. He got out of bed and went into the bathroom. After a minute or 2 he returned, eating toothpaste and carrying a safety razor blade. He started carefully cutting round the edges of the burnt areas of the bedclothes with the blade. He didn't know why he did this, but the operation did seem to improve the look of things. The cause of the disaster wasn't so immediately apparent. It now seemed much less obviously the work of a man, and might for a few seconds be put down to some fulminant dry rot or the ravages of a colony of moths. Then he turned to the rug and shaved off the burnt bit. After he'd done this, he turned the rug round so that the burn, without being actually hidden by a nearby chair, was nonetheless not far from it. Then he got dressed and went down to the breakfast room. The only person in the room was the Callahan girl, sitting behind a well-filled plate. Dixon said good morning to her. "Oh, good morning." Her tone was neutral, not hostile. He quickly decided on a bluff, speak-my-mind approach as the best cloak for his rudeness, past or to come. He said, "Afraid I got off on the wrong foot with you last night." She looked up quickly, and he saw with bitterness how pretty her neck was. "Oh, that... I shouldn't worry too much about it if I were you. Let's forget it, shall we?" "Glad to. Thanks very much." There was a pause while he noted with mild surprise how much and how quickly she was eating. The remains of a large pool of sauce were to be seen on her plate, besides a diminishing mound of fried egg, bacon, and tomatoes. Looking at these, he decided to postpone eating any himself. His gullet and stomach felt as if they were being deftly sewn up as he sat. He poured and drank a cup of black coffee, then refilled his cup. "Aren't you going to have any of this stuff?" the girl asked. "Well, not yet, I don't think." "What's the matter? Aren't you feeling so good?" "No, not really. I must admit, bit of a headache, you know." "Oh, did you go to the pub?" "Yes." "You had a lot, did you?" "I suppose I must have done, yes." "How much?" "Oh, 7 or 8 beers, possibly." "Well, if you drink as much as that, you must expect to feel a bit off colour the next day, mustn't you?" She drew herself upright in her seat in a schoolmarmy attitude. He remembered his father, who until the war had always worn stiff white collars, being reproved by a friend as excessively dignant in demeanour. This etymological sport expressed for Dixon exactly what he objected to in Christine. He said rather coldly, "Yes, I mustn't I?" Everybody was wondering where you'd got to. I've no doubt they were. Tell me, how did Mr. Welsh react? I've really no idea. He didn't seem to notice much. Dixon felt he could tackle the eggs and bacon now, so went to get some and said, "Well, that's a relief, I must say. I shall have to apologise to him, I suppose. It might be a good idea." She said this in a tone that made him turn his back for a moment at the sideboard and make his Chinese mandarin's face, hunching his shoulders a little. He disliked this girl and her boyfriend so much that he couldn't understand why they didn't dislike each other. Suddenly he remembered the bedclothes. He must get to his room quickly and look at them and see what ideas their physical presence suggested. "God," he said absently, "I'm afraid I shall have to dash off now." "Have you got to get back?" "No, I'm not actually going until... No, I mean, I've got to go upstairs." Realising that this was a poor exit line, he said wildly, "There's something wrong with my room, something I must alter." He looked at her and saw her eyes were dilated. "I had a fire last night." "You lit a fire in your bedroom?" "No, I didn't light it purposely. I lit it with a cigarette. It caught fire on its own." Her expression changed again. "Your bedroom caught fire?" "No, only the bed. I lit it with a cigarette." "You mean you set fire to your bed?" "That's right." She laughed. "Well, what are you going to do about it?" "I don't know yet. Look, I suppose you couldn't come up and have a look at it?" "Yes, do you think you could?" She sat up and thought. "Yes, all right. I don't guarantee anything, of course." "No, of course not. Thanks very much." They went in file through the hall and up the stairs. Dixon found with a pang of relief that he could open the bathroom door. The girl looked sternly at him. "What are we going in here for?" "My bedroom's on the far side of this." "Oh, I see. What a curious arrangement." "My goodness. You've certainly gone to town, haven't you?" She went forward and fingered the sheet and blankets like one shown material in a shop. "But this doesn't look like a burn. It looks as if it had been cut with something. Yes, I cut the burnt bits off with a razor blade. I thought it would look better than just leaving it burnt." "Why on earth did you do that?" "I can't really explain. I just thought it would look better." And the table, too, and the rug. You know, I don't know that I ought to be party to all this." She grinned, which made her look almost ludicrously healthy, then pressed her lips together, seeming to consider. "I think the best thing would be to remake the bed, with all this mess at the bottom out of sight. We can put the blanket that's only scorched, this one, on top. It'll probably be almost all right on the side that's underneath now. What about that?" "Yes, sounds all right to me. But we'd better get on with it, though." He heaved the bed from the wall while she watched with arms folded. Then they both set about the unmaking and remaking. As they worked, Dixon studied the Callahan girl and saw with fury that she was prettier than he'd thought. He wanted to implode his features, to crush air from his mouth, in a way and to a degree that might be set against the mess of feelings she aroused in him. Indignation, grief, resentment, peevishness, spite and sterile anger, all the allotropies of pain. The girl was doubly guilty, first for looking like that, secondly of appearing in front of him looking like that. "There," she said, "you couldn't guess what was underneath it all if you didn't know. What are you going to do with the table?" "I've been thinking about that. There's a little junk room at the end of the passage. If you'll go and see whether the coast's clear, I'll rush along there with it now." "Agreed. I must say that's an inspiration. With the table out of the way, nobody'd connect the sheets with the smoking. They'd think you tore them with your feet in a nightmare or something. Some nightmare, to get through 2 blankets as well." She looked at him open-mouthed, then began to laugh. Dixon began laughing too, not because he was much amused, but because he felt grateful to her for her laughter. They were still laughing a minute later when she beckoned to him from outside the bathroom door, when he ran out onto the landing with the table, and when Margaret suddenly flung open the door of her bedroom and saw them. "What do you imagine you're up to, James?" she asked. "We're just, I was just getting rid of this table, as a matter of fact," Dixon said, looking from one woman to the other. The Callahan girl made an extraordinarily loud snorting noise of incompetently suppressed laughter. Margaret said, "Just what is all this nonsense?" "It isn't nonsense, Margaret, I assure you. If anybody minds me saying so," the girl interrupted, "I think we'd better get rid of the table first and explain the whys and wherefores afterwards, don't you?" "That's right," Dixon said, put his head down and ran up the passage. When he returned, Margaret was waiting for him at the threshold of her room. One corner of her mouth was drawn in a way he knew well. The Callahan girl had gone. "Well, what was all that about, James?" He shut the door and began to explain. As he talked, his incendiarism and the countermeasures adopted struck him for the first time as funny. Surely Margaret, especially since she wasn't personally implicated, she must find them funny too. They formed the sort of story she liked. He said as much at the end of his account. Without changing her expression, she dissented. "I could see that you and that girl were finding it all pretty funny, though. You seem to be getting on a good deal better with her than you did last night." "Yes, that's good, isn't it? Incidentally, I thought she was abominably rude just now." "How do you mean?" "Barging in and sending you off with the table like that." Stung with this reflection on his dignity, Dixon said, "You've got this rude business on the winkle, Margaret. If anyone barged in, it was you, not her." He began regretting this speech well before it was over. She stared at him with her mouth a little open, then whipped abruptly round away from him. "I'm sorry. I won't barge in again. No, Margaret, you know I didn't mean it like that. Don't be ridiculous. You must see." "Oh, I see. All right, James, I see perfectly." This time her voice was flat. She wore a sort of Arty get-up of multicoloured shirt, skirt with fringed hem and pocket, low-heeled shoes and wooden beads. Dixon moved closer and saw that her hair had been recently washed. It lay in dry, lustreless wisps on the back of her neck. In that condition it struck him as quintessentially feminine, much more feminine than the Callahan girl's shining fair crop. Poor old Margaret, he thought, and rested his hand in a gesture he hoped was solicitous on her nearer shoulder. Before he could speak, she'd shaken his hand off, moved over to the window, and begun to talk in a strain that marked the opening, he soon realized, of a totally new phase of the scene they were evidently having. "Get away. How dare you? Stop pushing and pulling me about. Who do you think you are? You haven't even had the grace to apologize for last night. You behaved disgracefully. What the hell do you take me for? I won't stand for it." She went on like this, while Dixon looked her in the eyes. His panic mounted in sincerity and volume. Her body moved jerkily about, her head bobbed from side to side on its rather long neck, shaking the wooden beads about on the multicoloured shirt. "I was thinking only yesterday afternoon about the relationship we've been building up, how valuable it was, something really good. But that was silly, wasn't it? I was dead wrong. No, you're dead wrong now. You were right then," Dixon broke in. "These things don't just stop like that, you know. Human beings aren't as simple as that. They're not like machines." He went on like this while she looked him in the eyes. The rotten triteness of his words seemed, if anything, to help him to meet her gaze. She stood with one leg partly crossed over the other in her favourite attitude, no doubt designed to show off her legs, for they were good, her best feature. He soldiered on, and after a while she was no more than implacably annoyed, then sullen and monosyllabic. "Oh, James," she said at last, smoothing her hair, "do let's stop this for now. I'm tired. Terribly tired. I can't go on any more. I'm going back to bed. I just want to be left alone. Try to understand." "What about your breakfast?" "I don't want any." "Are you sure you'll be all right?" She said, "Oh, yes, please. Don't forget what I said." When no reply came, he went quickly out and into his bedroom, where he lay on the bed, smoking a cigarette and reflecting to small purpose on the events of the last hour. Margaret he succeeded in putting from his mind almost at once. It was all very complicated, but then it always had been that, and he'd hated what she'd said to him and what he'd said to her. But then he'd been bound to do that. How well, really, the Callahan girl had behaved, in spite of her standoffishness at times, and how sound her suggestion had been. That and her laughing fit proved that she wasn't as dignant as she looked. He remembered uneasily the awful glow of her skin, the distressing clarity of her eyes, the immoderate whiteness of her slightly irregular teeth. Then he cheered up a little as he put it to himself that her attachment to Bertrand was a fair guarantee of her being really very nasty. Yes, Bertrand. He must either make peace with him or keep out of the way. Keeping out of his way would almost certainly be better. He could combine it with keeping out of Margaret's way. The best thing to do was to lie low for as much of the day as possible, then make his apologies to the Welshes and leave at the first convenient moment. The examinations were in progress, and Dixon had nothing to do this morning but turn up at the Assembly Hall at 12:30 to collect some scripts. They would contain answers to questions he'd set about the Middle Ages. As he approached the common room, he thought briefly about the Middle Ages. Those who profess themselves unable to believe in the reality of human progress ought to cheer themselves up by a short study of the Middle Ages. The hydrogen bomb, the South African government, Chiang Kai-shek, Senator McCarthy himself, would then seem a light price to pay for no longer being in the Middle Ages. Had people ever been as nasty, as self-indulgent, as dull, as miserable, as cocksure, as bad at art, as dismally ludicrous, or as wrong as they'd been in the Middle Age? Margaret's way of referring to the Middle Ages. He grinned at this last thought, then stopped doing that on entering the common room and catching sight of her, pale and heavy-eyed, on her own, near the empty fireplace. Their relations hadn't altered materially during the last 10 days or so since the Arty weekend. It had taken him the whole of an evening in the Oak Lounge and a great deal of expense and hypocrisy to get her to admit that she still had a grievance against him, and more of the same sorts of commodity to persuade her to define, amplify, discuss, moderate, and finally abandon it. For some reason, periodically operative but impossible to name, the sight of her now filled him with affection and remorse. She was wearing her Arty get-up again, but had discarded the wooden beads in favour of a brooch consisting of a wooden letter M. A large envelope full of examination scripts was on the floor beside her chair. He said, "Hello, dear. How are you today?" "All right, thanks." He smiled tentatively. "You don't sound as though you mean that." "Don't I? I'm sorry. I'm perfectly all right, really." She spoke with extraordinary sharpness and moved abruptly on the chair arm she was sitting on, so that her back was to everybody in the room except Dixon, who saw that her eyes were filling with tears. "But, Margaret, you mustn't," he said in horror. "Don't cry." "I'm sorry. Everything's so bloody this morning." "Well, tell me about it, then. What's wrong? Dry your eyes." She took off her glasses and started blotting her eyes. "Oh, nothing. Everything and nothing." "Did you have another bad night?" "Yes, darling, I did, and it's made me terribly sorry for myself, as usual." "Doesn't anything seem to help?" "Oh, God, you know all about the baths and the hot milks and the aspirins and the window shut and the window open. They talked like this for a few minutes, while the other occupants of the room began to disperse to their various tasks. Dixon sweated quietly as the talk went on, trying to repel the persistent half-recollection or half-illusion of having casually told Margaret a couple of days previously that he'd ring her up at the Welshes the next night, which was now last night. Some invitation or promise was obviously required, if only to smother the problem. At the first opportunity he said, "What about lunch today? Are you free?" 10 minutes later, Margaret was on her way out, all smiles, to lock up her exam scripts and powder her nose. Dixon was glad that his trump card had had such a spectacular effect, but as is the way with trump cards, it had looked better in his hand than it did on the table. He had in his possession, however, a piece of information of which Margaret was ignorant. It was the connection, whatever it was, between Bertrand Welsh and Carol Goldsmith, which had suddenly leapt up again in his thoughts at the news from Margaret that Bertrand was taking Carol to the summer ball, her husband being committed to go to Leeds for the weekend. Presumably, Bertrand's blonde and busty Callahan piece had now, to her credit, been discarded. The interest of this situation compensated in large part for the likelihood that Carol, Bertrand, Margaret and himself would be going to the ball together, as a little party, Margaret had put it. "Honestly, James, she couldn't have been more livid," Margaret was saying, "and I can't say I blame her, having it thrown at her across the tea-table like that in front of me and the Neddies." "What was actually said?" Dixon asked, executing a turn at the corner of the dance floor and beginning to lead her up towards the band. "Well, he just said, 'Oh, by the way, Carol, I've been meaning to tell you that Christine's coming to the dance after all, and she's bringing her uncle with her. It seems the uncle came home from Paris early.' Then he went all facetious on her, so as not to have uncle partnering niece, which wouldn't be according to the best usage, or some such rubbish like that. I thought the best thing would be to switch her onto my ticket, if you've no objection, as if she could object with all the rest of us there listening. And Gore Urquhart would be only too pleased to escort you, I'm sure, and that was that." Dixon said. The strain of dancing, always considerable, and of keeping his eyes on Margaret's face as it bobbed and advanced and receded, made elaborate speech difficult for him. "I mean, I've never seen anything so abominably rude in my life. The man's quite impossible, James, socially and, well, in every other way. I say, though, it struck me at the time. Do you think there's anything, well, going on between Bertrand and Carol?" "I've no idea. What makes you say that?" "Haven't you ever noticed anything?" "I don't think so. Why?" "Oh, I don't know. It's really rather odd that he should ever have been taking her to the ball, and then her looking so furious. Well, anyway, I think she's done a good deal better for herself with Mr. Gore Urquhart. I must say he seems most charming, something quite exceptional these days." Before he had time to reply, the dance wheeled to an end. In a moment, an uneasy thundering, followed by a clashing thump, signalled the end of the set. Dixon heaved a sigh and wiped his palms on his handkerchief. "What about a drink?" he said. Margaret was darting her eyes this way and that. "Wait a minute, I just want to see if I can see the others. Ah, there they are." Bertrand and Christine were approaching. Bertrand, Dixon had to admit, was quite presentable in evening clothes, and to say of him now that he looked like an artist of some sort would have been true without being too offensive. It was on him that Dixon fixed his eye, less from interest than to avoid fixing it on Christine. She was looking at her best this evening. She wore a yellow dress that left her shoulders bare. It was perfectly plain, managing to reveal as decidedly ill-judged Margaret's royal blue taffeta, with its bow, and what he supposed were gatherings or something. "Well, what goes forward, people?" Bertrand asked. He glanced at Dixon, to whom he'd so far been fairly amiable. "Well, I thought we might go and have a drink," Dixon said. "Oh, do be quiet, James. Anybody'd think you'd die if you went an hour without one." "He probably would," Bertrand said. "Anyway, it's sensible of him not to want to take the risk. What about it, darling?" "Yes, all right." They went to the bar and discovered Gore Urquhart and Carol sitting at one of the tables, talking fairly hard. When he saw the others coming towards them, Gore Urquhart rose to his feet He was younger than Dixon had expected any distinguished man and an uncle of Christine's to be, somewhere in the middle 40s. His evening suit, too, was not nearly as spectacularly faultless as might have been predicted. His large, smooth face, surmounting a short, thin body, was the least symmetrical short of actual deformity that Dixon had ever seen. "I've managed to keep out of your principal's way so far," Gore Urquhart said with his lowland Scottish accent. "Oh, that's no mean achievement," Margaret said with a laugh. "I'm sure he's got all his spies out for you." "Do you think so now? Will I be able to get away again if he catches me?" "Most unlikely, sir," Bertrand said. "You know what they're like in this part of the world. Throw them a celebrity, and they'll fight over him like dogs over a bone. Why, even in my small way I've had a good deal of that sort of thing to endure, but of course it must be 1,000 times worse for you, sir, am I right?" Gore Urquhart said briskly, "In some ways," and drank from his glass. "Anyway, Mr. Gore Urquhart," Margaret said, "you're quite safe for the moment. The principal doesn't mix with the rabble in here." "So while I'm with the rabble I'm fairly safe, you mean, Miss Peel? Good. I'll stay with the rabble." All the people facing Dixon and to his left, Gore Urquhart himself, Bertrand and Margaret, laughed at this, and so did Dixon, who looked to his right and saw Christine smiling in a controlled fashion, and beyond her Carol, staring rather grimly at Bertrand. Before the laughter cleared, Dixon noticed Bertrand becoming aware of this scrutiny and looking away. Perturbed by the small tension in the company, Dixon was relieved when the drinks arrived to distract them. Bertrand settled himself next to Gore Urquhart and began talking to him in a low voice. Almost at once Christine addressed some remark to Carol. Margaret said to Dixon, "It is sweet of you to have brought me here, James. Oh, glad you're enjoying yourself. You don't sound as if you are very much." "Oh, I am, really." She looked earnestly at him and rested a hand on his arm. "Dear James, do you think it's wise for us to go around together like this?" "Why ever not?" he said in alarm. "Because you're so sweet to me, and I'm getting much too fond of you." In the midst of his panic, Dixon managed to find the thought that this, if true, would indeed be grounds for their seeing less of each other. Then he hit on a remark both honest and acceptable. "You mustn't say things like that." She laughed lightly. "Poor James," she said. "Keep my seat for me, will you, darling? I shan't be long." She went out. When she returned, the music was starting up in the ballroom once more. Margaret turned to Gore Urquhart and said vivaciously, "Now, Mr. Gore Urquhart, I'm not going to permit any more of this sulking about in here. Principal or no principal, it's the light fantastic for you. Come along." Gore Urquhart, smiling politely, let himself be led away out of the bar. Bertrand looked across at Carol. "Don't let's waste the band, my dear," he said. "I've paid 25 shillings for them, after all." "So you have, my dear," Carol said. "Care for a dance?" Dixon said to Christine. "I'm not much good, but I don't mind having a crack if you don't." She smiled. "Nor I if you don't." As he left the bar with Christine at his side, Dixon felt like a special agent, a Chicago warlord, an oil baron. He kept careful control over his features to stop them doing what they wanted to do and breaking out into an imbecile smirk of excitement and pride. When she turned and faced him on the edge of the floor, he found it hard to believe that she was really going to let him touch her, or that the men near them wouldn't spontaneously intervene to prevent him. But in a moment there they were in the conventional pseudo-embrace, actually dancing together, not very skillfully, but without doubt dancing. "What was the matter with Mrs. Goldsmith, do you know?" Christine asked. This inquisitiveness surprised him. "She did look rather fed up, didn't she?" he fenced. "Was it because she was expecting Bertrand to bring her here tonight instead of me? Did that mean she knew about the switch of partners? It needn't, but it might." "I don't know," he said, in a muffled voice. "I think you do." She sounded quite angry. "I wish you'd tell me." "I know nothing about it at all, I'm afraid. And in any case, it's nothing to do with me." "If that's your attitude, then there's nothing more to be said." Dixon felt himself flushing for the second time in the last few minutes. Obviously she'd been at her most typical when helping Bertrand to bait him at their first encounter. They danced on in silence for some time. The other couples moved around them, wheeling when a space momentarily presented itself, huddling and marking time in the crushes. Everybody else seemed to be talking, and eventually a female voice of Christine's pitch heard close at hand deceived Dixon. "What did you say?" he asked. "Nothing." Something would have to be said by him now, so he said what he'd been waiting to say all the evening. "I never got a chance to thank you for playing up so well over that bedclothes business." "Oh, that. I'd sooner not discuss that, if you don't mind." She couldn't be allowed to get away with that. "Supposing I do mind?" She shrugged clumsily, then dropped her eyes. "I'm sorry, that was silly of me. I didn't mean to be like that, actually. I thought the whole thing was brilliantly funny. But you see, I didn't feel like discussing it with you because that would have been like laughing at Bertrand's family behind his back, and that would have been wrong." The whole thing sounded rather childish, but Dixon was saved from having to reply by the intervention of an enormous, half-incoherent voice like that of an ogre at the onset of aphasia, which now began to sing through loudspeakers, "To get you in a taxi, honey, you better be ready 8:30. Oh, baby, don't be late." In trying to pull Christine out of the path of a short, red-faced man dancing with a tall, pale-faced woman, Dixon got badly out of time. "Start again," he mumbled, but they seemed unable to move together as before. "Here, you'll never do any good while you stand over there," Christine said. "I'm not close enough to you to feel what you're doing. Get hold of me properly." Gingerly, Dixon moved forward until they were standing up against each other. He took her warm right hand and steered her off. This time things were much better, though Dixon was a little shorter of breath than he thought he should be. Her body felt rounded and rather bulky against his, and he felt desire abruptly flooding his entire frame with an immense fatigue, as if he'd been struck by a bullet in some vital spot. All his facial muscles relaxed involuntarily. She caught his eye and pulled gently away as the music ended. In the bar again they found Gore Urquhart in his former seat, already being talked to by Bertrand, as if their conversation had never been interrupted. Margaret was in even closer attendance, if possible. She broke off from laughing at a retort of Gore Urquhart's to look up casually at Dixon with an air that suggested she was wondering idly who he might be. Oh, well, thought Dixon, each must enjoy himself as and when he can. But where was Carol? Just then she reappeared, walking up to them with a kind of deliberate carelessness that made Dixon suspect her of having a bottle of something hidden in the ladies' cloakroom. She turned to Dixon. "Come on, Jim," she said rather loudly. "I want you to dance with me. I take it that nobody here will object." "What's going on, Carol? That's what I'd like to know. How do you mean?" "You know what I mean, Jim, unless you go about with your eyes shut. He thinks he's only got to crook his bloody finger and I'll come running. Well, he's mistaken." It was on the tip of Dixon's tongue to tell Carol not to think she was fooling anyone by talking and behaving so much more drunkenly than she was in fact feeling, but he didn't, guessing that she needed some sort of mask and knowing by experience that this was a much more efficient one than drunkenness itself. He only said, "Bertrand? That's the fellow, the painter, you know, the great painter. Of course he knows he isn't great really, and that's what makes him behave like this. Great artists always have a lot of women. So if he can have a lot of women, that makes him a great artist. Never mind what his pictures are like. You can guess who the women are in this case. Me, and the girl you've got your eye on." Dixon started insincerely. The charge was quite unfounded, but at the same time it managed in some unscrupulous way to be well-founded too. "What the hell are you talking about? Don't waste my time like this, Jim. What are you going to do about it anyway? About what?" She dug her nails into the back of his hand. "Stop doing that. What are you going to do about Christine Callahan?" "Nothing, of course. What can I do?" "If you don't know what to do, I can't show you," as the actress said to the bishop. "Worried about what dear Margaret would do?" "Oh, look, do cut it out, Carol." "I thought so." "No, you let dear Margaret stew in her own juice. I've met people like that before, old boy, and believe me, it's the only thing to do. Throw her a lifebelt and she'll pull you under. Take it from me." She nodded, her eyes half closed. "Well, it's nothing to do with Margaret. It's just that I don't want to try anything on with Christine, that's all." "I've heard that one before." "No, honestly, Carol, I'd much rather see her once or twice and not do anything about it. What could I do about it anyway? She's a bit out of my class, don't you think? And if I did try anything on, I'd only get sent off with a flea in my ear. We're both tied up with other... You sound as if you're in love with her. Do you think so? He said almost eagerly. He couldn't help regarding her remark as a compliment, one that he'd been needing for a long time, too. Yes, and I'm telling you, Jim, you've got a moral duty to perform. Get that girl away from Bertrand. He's not her kind of man at all. Mind you remember that. The music stopped and they re-entered the bar. Dixon felt that he'd been doing this for weeks. The sight of their party still, or again just where they'd been before, made him want very much to pitch forward onto the floor and go to sleep. Bertrand was talking, Gore Urquhart was listening. Margaret was laughing. Only now she had a hand on Gore Urquhart's nearest shoulder. Christine was also probably listening to somebody, only now she had her head in her hands. A sudden douche of terror then squirted itself all over Dixon. After a moment he realized that this was because he had a plan and was about to carry it out. He panted a little with the enormity of it, then said quaveringly, "Here goes then, Carol. Goodbye for now." He went over and sat down in a vacant chair next to Christine, who turned to him with a smile, rather a rueful smile, he thought. "Oh, hello," she said. "I thought you must have gone home." "Not quite yet. You look as if you're being rather left out of things here." "Yes, Bertrand's always the same when he gets talking like this, but I mean, of course, he really did come here to meet Uncle Julius." "I can see that." He went on quickly. "Now listen to me, Christine. I'm going to go out and order a taxi now. It should be here in about 20 minutes. You come outside then, and I'll take you back to the Welshes in it. There'll be no funny business, I can guarantee that, straight home to the Welshes." Her immediate reaction looked like anger. "Why? Why should I?" "Because you're fed up, and no wonder either, that's why." "That's not the point. It's a ridiculous idea. Absolutely mad." "I wait for you," he said in an undertone, "in the porch. 20 minutes, don't forget." He turned and went off to find a phone. Dixon paused in the portico to light a cigarette. The taxi he'd ordered was due any minute. If by the time he'd finished his cigarette Christine had still not appeared, he'd just ask the taxi man to take him to his digs. So whatever happened, he'd be in a car soon. That was good, because total inability to move was almost upon him. In a couple of minutes he heard the sound of a car on gravel, but nobody came out of the building. Dixon glanced desperately up the corridor. 2 people appeared round the bend in it almost at once. The first one wasn't Christine, but a drunken man clicking frenziedly at a cigarette lighter. The second one, on the other hand, was. The manner of her appearance was so ordinary that he was almost shocked. He didn't know what he'd expected, but it wasn't this look of recognition on her face, this purposeful walk towards him. Glancing over at the line of cars, she said abruptly, "Did you manage to get one?" "Yes." He led her towards the taxi, which had now pulled up. He opened a rear door for her and said to the driver, "We'll make a start if you're ready." Then he got in beside her, and the car began to move. "That was all very efficient," Christine said. "You're getting good at this sort of thing, aren't you? First the sheets and table, and now this." "I didn't used to be." "Did you manage to get away all right?" he asked. "Oh, yes. Nobody seemed to object very much." "What did you say to them?" "I just explained things to Uncle Julius. He never minds what I do. And then I just told Bertrand I was going." "How did he react to that?" "He said, 'Oh, don't do that. I'll be with you in a minute.' Then he went on talking to Mrs. Goldsmith and Uncle, so I came away." "I see. All sounds very easy and quick." "Oh, it was." After a silence, she said, "I wasn't enjoying it much in there, you know. I left because I was feeling absolutely fed up with everything." "That's a bit sweeping. What had fed you up in particular?" "Everything. I've been feeling very depressed recently, and it all seemed to get too much for me tonight. It's all to do with Bertrand, you see. He can be extremely understanding and kind one minute, and completely unreasonable and childish the next. I feel I never know where I am with him or what he really wants, and now I think he wants us to get married, though he's never actually mentioned it." This seemed all for the moment. It crossed Dixon's mind that, apart from her voice, he'd no evidence that she was beside him at all. When he turned to his right, he saw only the darkest and most anonymous shape. She held herself so still that there was no sound of movement from clothing or upholstery. She seemed to use no scent, or anyway he couldn't smell any, and he was a long way from being able to think of touching her. The shoulders and hatted head of the taxi driver, outlined against the glow of the car's lights, were in a way much more real to him. Then Christine continued, "Tell me, from what you've seen of us both, do you think it would be a good thing if I did get married to Bertrand?" "Isn't that rather up to you?" "Of course it's up to me. I'm the one who's going to marry him or not marry him. I want to know what you think." "Well, then I should say no." "I see. Why not?" "Because I like you and I don't like him." "Is that all?" "Well, it's quite enough. It means each of you belongs to the two great classes of mankind, people I like and people I don't like. Are you in love with him?" "I don't much care for that word," she said, as if rebuking a foul-mouthed tradesman. "Why not?" "Because I don't know what it means." He gave a quiet yell. "Oh, don't say that, don't say that. It's a word you must often have come across in conversation and literature. Are you going to tell me it sends you flying to the dictionary each time? No. If you can tell me whether you like green gages or not, you can tell me whether you're in love with Bertrand or not, if you want to tell me, that is." Outside his lectures, this was the longest speech he'd made for years. "You're making it much too simple. All I can really say is that I'm pretty sure I was in love with Bertrand a little while ago, and now I'm rather less sure." She leaned forward and looked out of the window. "Where are we now, do you know?" "Oh, just over halfway, I should think." "I feel awfully sleepy. Look, would you mind if I had a nap for a few minutes? It'd make me feel much less tired, I know." "Of course, by all means." While she snuggled herself together in her corner, Dixon fought his disappointment at this device of hers for quitting his company. He thought he was getting on so well. His usual policy of not talking at length was the right one, after all. Just then she laid her head on his shoulder, and all his senses grew alert. "You don't mind, do you?" she asked. "The back of the seat's like iron." "You go ahead." Forcing himself to act before he could think, he slid his arm beneath her shoulders. She moved her head experimentally to and fro against him, then settled herself, and seemed to go to sleep at once. Dixon's heart began to pound a little. He now had all the evidence he wanted that she was there. He could sense her breathing. Her temple against his jaw and her shoulder under his hand were warm. Her hair smelt of well-brushed hair. He could feel the presence of her body. It was a pity it wasn't set off by the presence of her mind. The taxi swung round a bend, and he braced himself with his foot to maintain his position and hers. He couldn't go to sleep himself, but he could see to it that she stayed asleep. Presently the taxi stopped at the end of the track that led up to the Welsh house. Christine woke up and said after a moment, "Are you coming up? I wish you would, because I'm not quite sure how I'm going to get in. The maid lives out, I think." "Of course I'll come up," Dixon said. He settled a brief exchange with the taxi driver by refusing to discuss the question of payment until the taxi should be standing outside his, Dixon's digs, then went off into the darkness with Christine holding onto his arm like a staff. "I think we'd better look for a window first," Dixon said as they stood in front of the darkened house. "I don't want to ring the bell just in case the Welshes have got back before us." They went off carefully into the yard at the left side of the building. In the darkness, Dixon blundered into something which struck him dexterously on the shin and made him swear in a whisper. Christine laughed in a muffled way, as if her hands were over her mouth. By touch, Dixon identified the hazard as a water tap encased in planking, which was split and half shattered by some recent blow, as if of an ill-driven car. He went on, tiptoeing crunchingly, and found, almost with foreboding, a French window that had not even been latched. Dixon hesitated before entering the room. The senior Welshes might be home already. He imagined with horror the dimensions and duration of Welsh's wondering frown and the furtive entry of Christine and himself out of the darkness. Slowly he pulled open the window and stepped into the room past the floor-length curtain. His hands hissed their way round 2 walls until he found the light switch. "I'm going to put the light on," he said. "All right?" "Yes." "Right." He snapped the switch down and instinctively turned away from it as the room sprang into light about them. His movement brought him very close to Christine. They looked at each other, both blinking and smiling. Their faces were about on a level. Then very slowly, to give her all the time she might need to step back and away, Dixon put his arms round her. He kissed her for some seconds, not holding her too close. Her lips were dry and soft, and she felt very warm. At length she did step back. Dixon could only say, "Well, that was very nice," in a sort of wooden vivacity. "Yes, wasn't it? Worth coming back from the dance for?" "Yes." She turned away. Dixon said, "Tell me, how long are you staying here this time?" "For a few days. It's part of my holiday." "Oh, grand. When can you come out with me?" "Oh, don't be such a fool, Jim. How can I possibly come out with you? I'm a guest at this place. Bertrand asked me down here, and I'm tied up with him. Can't you see yourself how mean it would be?" "No, because I don't like Bertrand." "That doesn't make any difference." "Yes, it does." "Well, what about Margaret, then?" "You've got a point there, Christine. There's no question about that. But she's got no real claim on me, you know." "Hasn't she?" "She seems to think she has." When Dixon hesitated, he was aware of the utter silence. He said in a less harsh tone, "Look, Christine, put it like this. Would you like to come out with me, forgetting about Bertrand and Margaret for the moment?" "You know I would," she said at once. "Why do you think I let you take me away from the dance?" "So you did." He looked at her, and she looked back with her chin lifted and her mouth not quite closed. He put an arm round her shoulders and bent towards the near blonde head. They kissed, more earnestly than before. When they'd finished, she said, "Yes, all right then, but I still think it's a dirty trick. What do you suggest?" Dixon felt like a man interrupted at his investiture with the Order of Merit, to be told that a 6-figure cheque from a football pool's awaits him in the lobby. "What about tea?" "Yes, tea'd be fine. When? Would Monday do?" "No, I can't on Monday. What about Tuesday?" "Fine. 4 o'clock be all right for time?" He explained how to get to the hotel where they were to meet, and had hardly finished when the unmistakable and growing sound of a car became audible. "My God, here they are," he said, instinctively whispering again. "I'll wait until they've started coming in the front door, and then nip out by the window. You close it after me." "Right. See you on Tuesday. Good night." He scuttled out and saw her blow a kiss into the darkness while she fastened the window. Then the curtain fell back. The sky had cleared a little, and there was enough light to see his way by. He moved off down towards the road, feeling more tired than he could remember ever feeling in his life before. On Monday morning, Dixon was up at 8:15. He did this not so much because the thought of Miss Cutler's pallid fried eggs and bright red bacon appealed to him at that hour, but because he wanted, or rather had got, to spend a long morning in writing up his Merry England lecture. Early the previous evening, he'd tried working his notes for it up into a script. The first page of notes had yielded a page and 3 lines of script. At that rate, he'd be able to talk for 11.5 minutes, as his notes now stood. Some sort of pabulum for a further 48.5 minutes was evidently required, with perhaps a minute off for being introduced to the audience, another minute for water drinking, coughing and page-turning, and nothing at all for applause or curtain calls. Where was he going to find this supplementary pabulum? The only answer to this question seemed to be, yes, that's right, where? Ah, wait a minute. he get Professor Barclay to find him a book on medieval music. 20 minutes at least on that, with an apology for having let my interest run away with me. Welsh would absolutely eat that. It was a warm day, but overcast. Dixon hurried over to the music school, where, to his surprise, Barclay proved to be present, available, cooperative, and in possession of just the sort of book Dixon wanted. Feeling a little less disturbed, Dixon went round with it to the library and obtained, with almost sinister promptitude, a book on medieval costume and furniture. In the revolving door on the way out, his movement was abruptly checked by the intervention of somebody outside trying to revolve the door in the opposite and wrong direction. It was Welsh, in his fawn fishing hat, stepping back with a frown as Dixon went on pushing and emerged by his side. "Good morning, Professor." Welsh recognized him almost at once. "Dixon," he said. "Yes, Professor?" "I'm very glad to see you. I was wondering if you were doing anything this evening. I thought you might like to come over and have a meal with us. I imagine you finished most of your work for Wednesday's lecture." Dixon shifted the 2 books he had under his arm, in case Welsh might be able to see their titles. It was obvious that he couldn't afford to turn down this offer, so he said unhesitatingly, "Well, yes, of course, thank you very much, Professor. That's very kind of you." Welsh nodded as if pleased. "Well, then I'll see you. Tonight, yes. We'll go down in my car." 7 hours later, as Dixon was getting into Welsh's ancient old car, his thoughts and feelings were busy on the subject of Margaret. He didn't know how he was to face meeting her. She'd come round on Sunday morning, and bearing Carol's words in mind about not letting her pull him under, Dixon had finished with her. Margaret had been very upset. In fact, she'd been hysterical. Now he'd have to do something to show her that she wasn't entirely alone. He mustn't let himself get back on the old footing with her, but he must somehow reassure her of his continued support. How was he going to do that? In search of some distraction, he listened to what Welsh was saying. He was saying, "Most impressive," and immediately Dixon felt like picking up the spanner he could see in the dashboard pocket and hitting him on the back of the neck with it. He knew the sort of thing Welsh found impressive. Welsh went on talking even while he drove up the sandy path into the yard next to his house, grazed the shattered water tap, nosed into the garage entrance, and with a single frightful bound brought the car to rest within a couple of inches of the inner wall. Then he got out. Casting about for some means to leave the car, Dixon rejected the 6-inch corridor left to him between the door and the side wall nearest him, and slid across the front seats to the other door. As he did this, something seemed to pluck at the seat of his trousers. When he emerged into the giddy heat of the garage, he felt behind him and found he could comfortably insert his first 2 fingers into a rent in the material. A glance at the driver's seat showed the tip of what must have been a broken spring just emerging from the upholstery. He began slowly to follow Welsh, allowing a terrible grimace to dawn on his features, forcing his chin down as far as possible and trying to bring his nose up between his eyes. When this was nearing completion, he saw that 4 witnesses of his actions were posted at the long window some yards away. They were, left to right, Christine, Bertrand, Mrs. Welsh, and Margaret. He quickly restored his nose to its normal position, and, unable to think up any gesture or expression of greeting comprehensive enough to include all the members of such a quartet, hurriedly pursued Welsh's retreating figure round the corner of the house. As soon as he joined the company within, Welsh wheeled towards him. "Oh, Dixon," he said. He hesitated, then went on with unprecedented fluency. "I'm afraid there's been a bit of a mix-up. I'd forgotten that we'd all promised to go to the theatre this evening with the Goldsmiths. We shall have to dine early, so I shall just have time to change and freshen up and drive us into town. There'll be room for you, of course, if you want a lift. I'm sorry about it, but I shall have to rush off now. We must have you over another time." Before he was out of the room, Mrs. Welsh moved up like an actress dead on her cue. Bertrand was at her side. Rather red in the face, she said, "Oh, Mr. Dixon, I've been wondering when I should see you again. I'd like you to explain, if you can, just what happened to the sheet and blankets on your bed when you were our guest here recently." Dixon noticed that Christine and Margaret had moved down the room together, talking quietly. "I don't quite know, what," he mumbled. I didn't see, Am I to understand that you deny having had anything to do with the matter?" "No, I don't deny it. Please, Mrs. Welsh, I'm desperately sorry about it all. I know I should have come to you and told you about it, but I was afraid to. It was silly, I know. Will you send me the bill for what it costs you to replace it? Blankets as well, I mean. I must make it good. Thank God they still didn't know about the table." "Of course you must, Mr. Dixon. We'll discuss the details later. Now I think I'll just go and see how Mr. Welsh is getting on. There are one or two things I want him to—" Leaving the sentence in the air, she went out. Bertrand moved a pace closer. "I've been wanting us to have a little get-together for quite some time, old boy. Ever since that ball affair, in fact. What precisely was your game the other evening, when you induced Christine to skip out of the dance with you?" This must all have been clearly audible to Christine, who now came down the room with Margaret. Both girls avoided Dixon's eye while they went out, leaving him alone with Bertrand. When the door was shut, Dixon said, "What do you mean, what was my game? Wasn't playing any sort of game. You know what I mean as well as I do. What were you up to? You better ask Christine that. Don't be funny, Dixon. Just tell me what you intended doing with her, that's all." "I intended doing exactly what I did do. I intended to go away from that place with Christine, to bring her back here in a taxi, and finally return to my digs in the same taxi. That's what I did do." "Well, I'm not having that, do you understand? Well, it's too late not to have it. You've had it already." "Now just you get this straight into your head, Dixon. I've had enough of your merry little quips. Christine is my girl, and she stays my girl. If I find you playing this sort of trick again, or any sort of bloody clever trick, I'll break your horrible neck for you, and get you dismissed from your job as well, understand?" Dixon was saved from replying by the sudden re-entry of Christine and Margaret. The scene broke up. Christine took Bertrand by the hand and led him, still loudly protesting, out of the room. Margaret silently offered Dixon a cigarette, which he took. Neither spoke while they sat down side by side on a couch. Dixon looked at Margaret, and an intolerable weight fell upon him. He knew now what he'd been trying to conceal from himself ever since the previous morning, what the row with Bertrand had made him temporarily disbelieve. He and Christine would not, after all, be able to eat tea together the following afternoon. If he was going to eat that meal with any female, it would not be Christine, but Margaret. He felt very ill. "Was that about the dance business?" Margaret asked. "Yes, he seemed to resent it all, rather." "I'm not surprised. Why was he shouting?" "He was trying to persuade me to keep off the grass." "Are you going to?" "Yes." "Why, James?" "Because of you." He'd been expecting a demonstration of some strong feeling or other, but she only said, "I think that's rather silly of you," in a neutral tone that wasn't ostentatiously neutral, but simply neutral. "What makes you say that?" "Well, I thought we got all that settled yesterday. I don't see the point of starting the whole thing over again." "It can't be helped. We'd have started it again some time. It might just as well be now." "Don't be ridiculous. You'd have much more fun with her than ever you had with me." "That's as maybe. The point is that I've got to stick to you." He said this without bitterness, nor did he feel any. A minute or more went by before either spoke. Then he said, "Let's go to the pictures tonight. You can get out of the theatre. Carol won't mind, I know." "I wasn't going anyway." "Good." Dixon felt glad it was over. "I'll go and find Neddy and book a seat in the car. He can get 6 in all right. You go up and get ready." As soon as Margaret had gone, Dixon turned round and saw Christine coming towards him. She smiled. "I hope you didn't have too bad a time with Bertrand," she said. "Bertrand? Oh, no, it's all right. I managed to calm him down after a bit." He watched her. She stood with her legs apart and looked very sturdy and confident. A feeling of grief that was also a feeling of exasperation settled upon him. "About this tea tomorrow," he said. "Yes," she said, looking a little nervous. "What about it?" As she said this, Welsh started up his car at the side of the house. She added, "You needn't worry. I'll be there all right." Before he could reply, she glanced over her shoulder into the hall and shook her finger at him, frowning. Bertrand came out onto the step, glancing from one of them to the other. Christine again frowned at Dixon, then at Bertrand. "Now, whatever you two think of each other," she said, "for goodness sake, pull yourselves together, both of you, and behave decently in front of Mr. and Mrs. Welsh. If you start quarrelling in the car, I'll jump out." They stood apart from each other for a few moments, while Dixon's regret concentrated on the fact that to abandon the pursuit of Christine meant imposing a ceasefire in the Bertrand campaign. Then Welsh's car, with its owner at the wheel, came bouncing round the corner, and the three of them moved towards it. Dixon looked at the telephone, where it stood on a black plush cloth in the middle of a bamboo table, situated in Miss Cutler's drawing-room. He must cancel the tea date with Christine, now only 6 hours ahead. To do that, he must take the chance of Mrs. Welsh answering the phone. To give himself courage, he reached for his cigarette. As he was lighting one, the bell of the phone went off within 2 feet of his head. He started violently and began coughing, then took up the phone. "Hello?" A voice he realized with relief was quite strange to him, said, "Oh, have you a Mr. Dixon living there, please?" Speaking. "Oh, Mr. Dixon, I'm so glad I've got to you. Your university gave me the number. My name's Catchpole. I expect you've heard of me from Margaret Peel." Dixon grew tense. "Yes, I have," he said, noncommittally. "I rang up because I thought you might be able to give me some news of Margaret. I've been away recently." "Well, why don't you get hold of her and ask her yourself? Or perhaps you've tried that and she won't speak to you." "Well, I can understand that." Dixon began to tremble. "There must be some mistake about your name's Catchpole, isn't it?" "Yes, please." "Well, then there's no mistake. I know all about you." There was a pause. Then Catchpole said, "There's some kind of mix-up here. I can see that. I'd like to meet you sometime, if I may, and try to straighten things out. We can't do it over the phone. What about it?" Dixon hesitated. "All right. What do you suggest?" They arranged to meet for a pre-lunch drink in a pub at the foot of College Road the next day but one, Thursday. When Catchpole had rung off, Dixon sat for some minutes smoking. It was worrying, but then most of the things that had happened to him recently were that, and a good deal more besides. Anyway, he'd turn up and see what was what. With a sigh, he went up to his room, got out the notes for his lecture, and went on working them up into a script. 5 hours later, he had what he estimated as 44 minutes' worth of lecture. It seemed to him by then as if there were no facts anywhere in the universe, in his own brain or anyone else's, or just lying about loose, which could possibly be brought within his present scope. The 15 minutes needed to top the thing up to the 59 minutes he'd set himself would have to be occupied by a presumably rather extensive conclusion, and he didn't want to write one of those. Something on the lines of, "Finally, thank God for the 20th century," would satisfy him, but it wouldn't satisfy Welsh. Suddenly he stopped writing, ran into the bathroom, and started washing with frenzied speed. He'd completely forgotten to cancel tea with Christine. Now he'd only just make it. For all the energy of his movements, he began to feel a little queasy with apprehension. He arrived at the hotel 2 minutes late. On turning into the lounge where tea was served, he felt a pang of fear, or whatever emotion it was, kicking at his diaphragm, when he saw Christine already sitting waiting for him. She smiled as he approached. "Hello, Jim." He was feeling physically very nervous. "Hello," he said, with a half cough. Today she looked unmanningly pretty, so much so that Dixon's head began to spin with the effort of thinking of something to say, something different from what he'd come on purpose to say. "How are you?" she asked. "All right, thanks. I've been working." "You managed to get away without any fuss, I hope?" "I don't know about without any fuss." "Oh, what happened?" "I think Bertrand was rather suspicious. I told him there were 1 or 2 things I wanted to do in town. I didn't mention anything in particular because I thought that would have looked a bit... Quite. And how did he take that?" "Not too well. He came back with a lot of things about me being my own mistress, and I was to do what I wanted to do, and I wasn't to feel I was tied up in any way. It made me feel rather mean." "I can understand that all right." She leant forward and put her elbows on the low circular table between them. "You see, Jim, in a way I think it was rather a bad thing my coming to meet you at all, but I'd said I would, and so I had to come. I'm sorry to have got on to this straight away when we've hardly had time to say hello to each other, but you can see what I'm leading up to, can't you?" Dixon didn't reflect that this attitude would make his task an easy one. He said in a flat voice, "You mean you don't want to go on with this?" "I don't really see how we could go on with it, do you? After all, you've got your commitments with Margaret, haven't you?" "Yes," he replied. "That was what I was going to tell you about this afternoon, only you got in first." "I see. Things have all rather come to a head in the last few days, as a matter of fact, since the ball, really." She looked at him quickly. "There was a row over that, was there?" "Well, yes, suppose you could say that. A good deal more than a row, actually." Dixon gave a compressed but otherwise only slightly edited account of his past relations with Margaret, finishing with their visit to the pictures the previous evening. He gave a cigarette to Christine, took one himself, and said, "So now it's all more or less on again, though I shouldn't like to have to explain just what it is that's more or less on again." Christine glanced round the room, then said didactically, "Well, it looks as if we're both taken care of, doesn't it?" There was a pause, then Dixon said, "Are we ever going to see each other again, then?" "Once more, anyway. I'm coming to your lecture tomorrow, and to the sherry party at the principal's before it." "Oh, God, Christine, you don't want to come to that. You'll be bored stiff. How have you let yourself in for that?" "Uncle Julius had been asked by the principal, and it seems that he said he'd come in a weak moment, and now he insists on me coming to keep him company. Rather queer. He said he was looking forward to meeting you again." "Why the hell did he say that? I've hardly said 2 words to the man." "Well, that's what he said. Don't ask me what he meant." She stood up, and so did Dixon. "I must go. Give me your address, Christine." She looked at him scornfully, her brown eyes dilated under the dark eyebrows. "That'll do no good at all. What on earth would be the point?" "Well, it would make me feel we hadn't seen the last of each other." "Well, there's no point in feeling that, is there?" She went quickly past him, and out of the room without looking back. "I hope it isn't too painful, Dixon," the principal said the following night in the common room. Dixon's hand went up involuntarily to his black eye. That morning, Bertrand, having discovered that Christine had seen Dixon once more, had called on him and attempted to carry out his earlier threat of breaking his neck. To his surprise, Dixon had proved the stronger. He now said, "Oh, no, sir. I'm surprised it's come up at all, really. It was quite a light knock." "On the corner of the wash-hand basin, you said?" another voice asked. "That's right, Mr. Gore-Urquhart. One of those silly things one does occasionally. I dropped my razor, bent down for it, and bang, there I was, reeling about like a heavyweight." Gore-Urquhart nodded slowly. "Most unfortunate," he said. He looked Dixon up and down. "If I'd been asked now," he went on, "I'd have said he got himself into a fight. Eh, Principal?" The principal, a small ventricose man with a polished, rosy, bald head, gave a laugh. The 4th member of the quartet spoke up. "Well, I hope it won't interfere with your reading from your... "Oh, no, Professor," Dixon said. "I guarantee I could read that script blindfold. I've been through it so many times." Welsh nodded. "It's a good plan," he said. "I remember when I first began lecturing, I was silly enough just to write the stuff down and not bother about..." There now appeared a diversion in the shape of the porter with a tray of glasses of sherry. Dixon willed his hand to stay at his side until his 3 seniors had helped themselves, then let it bear the fullest remaining glass to his lips. It slid down warmly to join the previous 3 sherries and the half-dozen measures of whisky he'd had before coming out. In a sense, but only in a sense, he was beginning not to worry about the lecture, which was to start in 20 minutes' time at 6:30. After a moment, the principal moved over to a group of local worthies, and almost at the same time a signal from Mrs. Welsh drew Welsh away. Dixon was left with Gore-Urquhart, who now said, "How long have you been in this game, then, Dixon?" "Getting on for 9 months now. They took me on last autumn." "I've a notion you're not too happy in it, am I right?" "Yes, I think you are right on the whole." "Where's the trouble, in you or in it?" "Oh, both, I should say. They waste my time and I waste theirs." "I see. It's a waste of time teaching history, is it?" Dixon resolved not to mind what he said to this man. No, well taught and sensibly taught, history could do people a lot of good. But in practice it doesn't work out like that. Things get in the way. I don't quite see who's to blame for it. Bad teaching's the main thing, not bad students, I mean. Gore Urquhart nodded, then shot a quick glance at him. "This lecture of yours tonight, now, whose idea was it?" "Professor Welshes. I could hardly refuse, of course. If it goes well, it'll improve my standing here." "You're ambitious?" "No. I've done badly here since I got the job. This lecture might help to save me getting the sack." "Here, laddie," Gore Urquhart said, and snatched 2 glasses of sherry from the porter's tray. Dixon thought perhaps he oughtn't to drink any more. He was already beginning to feel a little splendid, but took the glass that was held out to him and drank from it. As he did so, 2 of the worthies came over and drew Gore Urquhart off to join their group round the principal. Dixon couldn't help admiring the way in which, without saying or doing anything specific, they established so effortlessly that he himself wasn't expected to accompany them. Then, as he watched incuriously, he saw Gore Urquhart fall slightly behind his companions and look across to where the goldsmiths were standing. Cecil was in deep talk and didn't notice Carol catching Gore Urquhart's eye. An almost imperceptible and quite indecipherable glance passed between them. This puzzled Dixon, of course, and in some way troubled him, but deciding to ponder about it later, if ever, he drained his glass and went up to where Christine and Bertrand were standing. "Hello, you two," he cried gaily. "Where have you been hiding?" Christine flashed a look at Bertrand that made him not say whatever he'd been going to say, and said herself, "I'd no idea this was going to be such a grand affair. Half the bigwigs in the city must be here." "I'd like us to go over to your uncle now, Christine," Bertrand said. "There are 1 or 2 things I want to discuss with him, if you remember." "In a minute, Bertrand. There's plenty of time," Christine said dignantly. No, there isn't plenty of time. The thing's due to start in about 10 minutes, and if you remember, I came here simply and solely to get hold of your uncle." He was wearing his blue berry, and it quivered as he spoke. "Why, hello, Bertie, dear," Carol said behind him. "I want you. Come over here, will you?" Bertrand had performed a start of surprise and a half-turn in one movement. "Oh, hello, Carol, but I was just—" "I shan't keep you a minute," Carol said, and gripped his arm. "I'll return him in good condition," she added over her shoulder to Christine. "Well, hello, Christine," Dixon said. "Oh, hello. This really is the last time, isn't it?" "Yes, that's right." He felt petulant and self-pitying. "You don't seem to mind as much as I do." She looked at him for a moment, then abruptly turned her head aside. "I've done all my minding," she said. "What's the matter with your eye?" "Bertrand and I had a fight this afternoon." "A fight? You didn't say anything to me about it. What were you fighting about?" "He told me to keep off the grass where you were concerned, and I said I wouldn't, so we started fighting." "But we agreed. You haven't changed your mind about—" No, I just wasn't going to let him tell me what to do, that's all." "But fancy having a fight." She seemed to be repressing a laugh. "You lost, by the look of you." "Not at all. I knocked him right over. He stayed down for a bit, too." "My God." She stared at him, her full dry lips slightly apart. A pang of helpless desire made Dixon feel heavy and immovable. At this moment of silence, Bertrand suddenly reappeared and caught hold of Christine's arm, pulling her away with some violence. Before moving off, he said to Dixon, "Right, my lad, this is the finish for you. You'd better start looking for another job. I mean that." Christine gave Dixon a brief startled glance over her shoulder as she was virtually frog-marched towards the group that contained her uncle. Dixon found his thoughts being blindly swept along by panic. Bertrand must mean what he said. Whatever it was that went on in Welsh's head, the facts his son had to reveal must surely have a significant influence, and even if they didn't, there was his wife's contribution to add to the scale. From across the room he could hear Welsh calling, "Ready, Dixon?" "See you in the hall, Professor," he called back, then hurried out and into the staff cloakroom. Stage fright was upon him now. His hands were cold and damp, and he had difficulty in controlling his breathing. In the lavatory he found himself confronted by Gore Urquhart. "Hello, Dixon." Gore Urquhart stood gazing at him intently. After a moment he said, "You may be feeling a little nervous, laddie." "Very nervous." Gore Urquhart nodded and produced a slim but substantial flask from his ill-fitting clothes. "Have a swig." "Thanks." Deciding not to bother about coughing, Dixon took a good pull at what was evidently neat Scotch whisky, more evidently than any drink he'd ever had. He coughed wildly. "Ah, that's good stuff, that. Have another swig." "Thanks." Dixon did exactly as before. "That'll do you a power of good. Well, we'd best get along if we don't want to keep them waiting." The last stragglers were still leaving the common room and moving up the stairs. At the stair head a little group was waiting. The Goldsmiths, Bertrand, Christine, Welsh, and the other lecturers in the history department. They began moving into the hall, which was disconcertingly full. The front row of the gallery held an unbroken line of students. There was a loud mixture of conversations. "Here you go then, laddie," Urquhart said in an undertone. "No need to worry. To hell with all this." He gripped Dixon's arm and withdrew. Aware that a shuffling for places was going on behind him, Dixon followed Welsh onto the platform. Welsh uttered the preludial blaring sound with which he was accustomed to call for silence at the start of a lecture. We're here tonight," he informed the audience, "to listen to a lecture." While Welsh talked, his body swaying to and fro, Dixon felt a wave of heat spread from the small of his back and establish itself in his scalp. On the point of groaning involuntarily, he tried to will himself into feeling all right. Only the nervousness, he told himself, and the drink, of course. When Welsh said, "Mr. Dixon," and sat down, Dixon stood up. A loud thunder of applause started up, chiefly, it seemed, from the gallery. With some difficulty, Dixon took up his stand at the lectern, ran his eye over his first sentence, and raised his head. The applause died away slightly, then gathered force again, soon reaching a higher level than before. The part of the audience in the gallery had had its first clear view of Dixon's black eye. Dixon's blood rushed in his ears, as if he were about to sneeze. How could he stand up here in front of them all and try to talk? What noises would come out of his mouth if he did? He smoothed the edge of his script and began. When he'd spoken about half a dozen sentences, he realized that something was very wrong. Then he realized what it was. He was using Welsh's manner of address. In an effort to make his script sound spontaneous, he'd inserted an "of course" here and a "you see" there and "as you might call it" somewhere else. Nothing so firmly recalled Welsh as that sort of thing. And now, as this flashed into his labouring mind, he began to trip up on one or two phrases, to hesitate and to repeat words, even to lose his place once, so that a 10-second pause supervened. The mounting murmur from the gallery indicated that these effects were not passing unappreciated. Sweating and flushing, he stopped speaking, poised his mouth for a tone as different from Welsh's as possible, and started off afresh. Everything seemed all right for the moment. As he talked, he began glancing round the front rows, and noticed Christine and Carol pushing past Cecil with the clear intention of leaving the hall. Bertrand was leaning over and stage-whispering to them. Urquhart, half risen, looked concerned. Flustered, Dixon stopped talking again. When he recovered himself, he found that he'd once more lost his place in mid-sentence. Biting his lip, he resolved not to run off the rails again. He cleared his throat and went on in a clipped tone, emphasizing all the consonants and keeping his voice well up at the end of each phrase. At any rate, he thought, they'll hear every word now. As he went on, he was for the second time conscious of something being very wrong. It was moments before he realized that he was now imitating the principal. He looked up. There seemed to be a lot of movement in the gallery. Something heavy crashed to the floor up there. Voices were now also starting up in the body of the hall. "What's the matter with you, Dixon?" Welsh hissed. "Sorry, sir, bit nervous. All right in a minute." It was a close evening. Dixon felt intolerably hot. With a shaking hand he poured himself a glass of water from the carafe before him and drank feverishly. He made a last effort to pull himself together and began again. But while he read, things began slowly to go wrong for the third time. Not as before with what he was saying or how he was saying it. These things had to do with the inside of his head. A feeling, not so much of drunkenness, but of immense depression and fatigue, was taking almost tangible shape there. While he spoke one sentence, sadness at the thought of Christine seemed to be trying to grip his tongue at the root and reduce him to an elegiac silence. While he spoke another, cries of irritated horror fumbled for admission at his larynx so as to make public what he felt about the Margaret situation. While he spoke the next, anger and fear threatened to twist his mouth, tongue and lips into the right position for a hysterical denunciation of Bertrand, Mrs. Welsh, the principal, the registrar, the college council, the college. He began to lose all consciousness of the audience before him. The only member of it he cared about had left, and was presumably not going to come back. "What, finally, is the practical application of all this?" Dixon said at last. "Listen, and I'll tell you. The point about Merry England is that it was about the most unmerry period in our history. It's only the homemade pottery crowd, the organic husbandry crowd, the recorder-playing crowd." He paused and swayed. The heat, the drink, the nervousness, the guilt, at last joined forces in him. His head seemed to be swelling and growing lighter at the same time. His body felt as if it were being ground out into its constituent granules. His ears hummed, and the sides, top and bottom of his vision were becoming invaded by a smoky, greasy darkness. Chairs scraped at either side of him. A hand caught at his shoulder and made him stumble. With Welsh's arm round his shoulders, he sank to his knees, half hearing the principal's voice saying above a tumult, "From finishing his lecture through sudden indisposition. I'm sure you'll all—" "I've done it now," he managed to think, and without even telling them. He drew air into his lungs. If he could push it out again, he'd be all right. But he couldn't, and everything faded out in a great roar of wordless voices. The following morning, Dixon's stomach turned over as he recognized Welsh's handwriting on a note in his pigeonhole. He went out of the common room and upstairs reading it. Welsh felt he ought to let him know unofficially that when the council met next week he would be unable to recommend Dixon's retention on the staff. He advised Dixon, also unofficially, to wind up his affairs in the district and leave as soon as possible. He would furnish whatever testimonials he could for any application Dixon might make for a new job, provided it were outside the city. There was a P.S. telling Dixon he needn't worry about the matter of the bedclothes. For his part, Welsh was prepared to consider it settled. Well, that was decent of him. Dixon felt a slight stab of conscience at having rather let Welsh down over the lecture, and a less slight one at having spent so much of his time and energy in hating Welsh. He went into the room he shared with Cecil Goldsmith and stood at the window. The sultriness of the previous few days had passed without thunder, and the sky promised hours of sunshine. He could easily get a school-teaching job. His old headmaster had told him at Christmas that a senior history post in the school wouldn't be filled until September. He'd write to him and say he'd decided he wasn't cut out for university teaching. But he wouldn't write today. Not today. Today he would go home. He went out and down the stairs. As he walked along College Road, Dixon remembered that this was the day he was to see Catchpole at lunchtime. What could the fellow want? No use wondering about that. The important thing was how to kill time until then. Back at his digs, he bathed his eye, which was beginning to fade a little, though its new colour promised to be just as disfiguring and a good deal less wholesome. While he was doing so, he heard the phone ring, and a few minutes later Miss Cutler tapped on the door. "Are you there, Mr. Dixon?" "Yes, what is it, Miss Cutler?" "A gentleman on the phone for you." "Who is it? I'm afraid I didn't get the name." Dixon quickly dried his eye and went downstairs. He picked up the phone and heard a man's voice, the mouth too close to the microphone, saying, "Hello, that you, Dixon?" "Yes, speaking. Who's that?" "Go Urquhart here. Got the sack, have you?" "Yes." "Good. Then I won't have to break a confidence by telling you so. Well, what are your plans, Dixon?" "I was thinking of going in for school teaching." "Are you right set on it?" "No, not really." "Good, I've got a job for you. 500 a year. You'll have to start at once on Monday. It'll mean living in London. You accept?" Dixon found he could not only breathe, but talk. "What job is it?" "Sort of private secretarial work. Not much correspondence, though. A young woman does most of that. It'll be mainly meeting people or telling people I can't meet them. We'll go into the details on Monday morning. 10 o'clock at my house in London. Take down the address." He gave it, then said, "Right, well, I'll see you. Just a minute, Mr. Gore-Urquhart. Shall I be working with Bertrand Welsh? Whatever gave you that idea?" "Well, nothing. I just gathered he was after a job with you, that's all." "That's the job you've got. I knew young Welsh was no good as soon as I set eyes on him. Like his pictures. Any more questions?" "No, that's all. Thank you. 10 o'clock Monday." He rang off. Dixon rose slowly from the bamboo table. What noise could he make to express his frenzy of hilarious awe? He drew in his breath for a growl of happiness, but was recalled to everyday affairs by a single hasty chime from the clock on the mantelpiece. It was 12:30, the time he was supposed to be meeting Catchpole to discuss Margaret. What should he do? Living in London would make the Margaret problem less important, or rather, less immediate. His curiosity triumphed. Catchpole turned out to be a tall, thin young man in his early 20s who looked like an intellectual trying to pass himself off as a bank clerk. He got Dixon a drink, and after a few preliminaries said, "I think the best thing I can do is give you the true facts of this business. Do you agree with that?" "Yes, all right." "Well, firstly, contrary to what Margaret might have told you, she and I were never lovers in either the emotional or what I might call the technical sense. That's news to you, I take it." "Yes," Dixon said. He felt curiously frightened, as if Catchpole were trying to pick a quarrel with him. "I thought it might be. I met her at a political function, and found myself, without quite knowing how, going about with her, taking her to the theatre and to concerts and all that kind of thing. But soon I was perpetually being accused of hurting her, ignoring her, trying to humiliate her in front of other women. Have you had any experiences of that sort with her?" "Yes," Dixon said. "Go on." "Well, after a particularly senseless row about some remark I'd made when introducing her to my sister, I decided I didn't want any more of that kind of thing. I told her so. There was the most shattering scene. We were out shopping, I remember, and she started shouting at me in the street. It was really dreadful. I felt I couldn't stand another minute of it, so finally, to keep her quiet, I agreed to go round and see her that evening about 10 o'clock. When the time came, I couldn't face going. A couple of days later, when I found out about her attempted suicide, I realised that that was the very evening I'd been supposed to go and see her." "Wait a minute," Dixon said with a dry mouth. "She asked me to go round that evening as well." Catchpole jumped. "You quite sure? You sure it was that evening?" "Absolutely. I can remember the whole thing quite clearly. As a matter of fact, we'd just been buying the sleeping pills when she asked me to come round, the one she must have used in the evening. That's how I remember. Why, what's up?" "She bought some sleeping pills while she was with you?" "Yes, that's right." Catchpole said slowly, "But she bought a bottle of pills while she was with me in the afternoon." They looked at each other in silence. "I imagine she forged a prescription," Dixon said finally. "We were both supposed to be there then, and see what we'd driven her to," Catchpole said bitterly. "I knew she was neurotic, but not as neurotic as that. It was lucky for her that the chap in the room underneath came up to complain about her wireless. She wouldn't have taken a risk like that. No, this pretty well confirms what I've always thought. Margaret had no intention of committing suicide then or at any other time." He felt he must get away from Catchpole for a moment. As soon as he'd rejoined him with the drinks, Catchpole said, "Well, I'm extremely grateful to you for doing this for me. I'm completely free of her now. No more worrying about how she is, thank God. That's worth a great deal." He gazed at Dixon. "And you're free of her too, I hope?" He finished his drink and stood up. "Don't try to help Margaret any more. It's too dangerous for you. I know what I'm talking about. She doesn't need any help either, you know, really. Best of luck to you. Goodbye." They shook hands, and Catchpole strode out, his tie flapping. Dixon finished his drink and left a couple of minutes later. He strolled back to his digs through the lunchtime crowds. All the facts seemed to fit, but Margaret had fixed herself too firmly in his life and his emotions to be pushed out of them by a mere recital of facts. Failing some other purgative agent than facts, he could foresee himself coming to disbelieve this lot altogether. Miss Cutler provided lunch for those who asked for it at 1 o'clock. He'd planned to take advantage of this and catch a train home just after 2, but on entering the dining room he encountered Miss Cutler, who told him there'd been a phone call from a Christine Callahan, who wanted him, Dixon, to see her off on the 1:50 train from the station in the next village. Dixon knew the station was the one near Welshes' house. He glanced at the clock, told Miss Cutler he wouldn't be needing his lunch after all, and ran out into the street. He felt as if he'd been hurrying all his life. Why wasn't she getting a train from the city station? There was an excellent one to London at 3:20, he knew. What was her news? Oh, hell. It was probably just that Uncle Julius was going to offer him a job. She wouldn't have counted on his having heard so quickly. A couple of 100 yards away, a bus was coming slowly up the hill from the city. It was too far off for him to be able to read its destination screen, and in any case his exertions had misted his glasses over. But it must be the one, and he must get it. He sensed, as far as he could sense anything at the moment, that something would go badly wrong if he failed to turn up at the station, that something he wanted would be withdrawn. He began running even faster, so that people began to skip out of his way and look at him with wondering resentment. Unbelievably, he reached the stop in time, boarded the bus, and climbed effortfully to the top deck. There he made his rebounding way to the front seat and collapsed into it without being able to afford the breath to groan. As he sat there, he realized that his mind had been made up about Margaret as soon as he decided to make this journey. For the first time, he really felt that it was no use trying to save those who fundamentally would rather not be saved. To go on trying would not merely be to yield to pity and sentimentality, but wrong, and to pursue it to its conclusion inhumane. It was all very bad luck on Margaret, and probably derived from the anterior bad luck of being sexually unattractive. Christine's more normal, i.e. less unworkable character no doubt resulted, in part at any rate, from having been lucky with her face and figure. But that was simply that. The bus wound its way slowly through the country roads, while Dixon's head switched angrily to and fro in vain search for a clock. At last, seeing the hulk of the railway station 30 yards off, he rattled along the aisle to the stairs. Before the bus had reached the station stop, he plunged down, out, across the road, and into the booking hall. The clock over the ticket office pointed to 1:47. Dixon flung himself at the barrier. A hard-faced man confronted him. "Which platform for London, please?" The man looked at him appraisingly. "Bit early, aren't you?" "Eh?" "Next to London's 8:17. 8:17? What about the 1:50? "No, 1:50. Haven't got it mixed up with the 1:40 by any chance?" Dixon swallowed. "I think I must have done," he said. "Thanks. Sorry, George." Nodding mechanically, Dixon turned away. Miss Cutler must have made a mistake in taking down Christine's message. He walked slowly to the entrance and stood looking out from the shadows at the little sunlit square. As he watched, wondering what to do next, he caught sight of a car with a damaged wing moving uncertainly round a post office van. Something about this car held Dixon's attention. It began to crawl towards him, roaring like a bulldozer, then froze in its tracks. A tallish blonde girl, wearing a wine-coloured costume and carrying a mackintosh and a large suitcase, got out and began hurrying towards the spot where Dixon stood. Dixon skipped out of sight behind a pillar. He heard Christine's steps approaching. Then she came into view 4 or 5 feet away, turned her head, and saw him at once. Her face broke into a smile of what seemed to him pure affection. "You got my message, then?" she said. She looked ridiculously pretty. "Come here, Christine, quickly." He drew her into the shelter of his pillar. She stared about her and then at him. "But we ought to be running up onto the platform. My train's nearly due." "Your train's gone. It went at 1:40. "It couldn't have done." "It could and did. I asked the man." "But Mr. Welsh said it went at 1:50. "Oh, he did he? That explains everything." "Are you sure? Why are we hiding?" Ignoring her, his hand unnoticed on her arm, Dixon leant carefully past her. Welsh was now broadside on across the main exit from the square. "Right, we'll just give the bloody old fool time to get clear, and then we'll go and have a drink." They left Christine's case in the luggage office and walked out into the square. Dixon's physical discomfort grew steadily at the thought of Christine's news, now nearing revelation. He wanted to bet himself it would be bad, so that he might stand a chance of its being good. "What's happened that you wanted to tell me?" He tried to force his spirits down, to expect nothing but unexpected and very nasty nastiness. She looked at him, and he noticed that the whites of her eyes were a very light blue. "I finished with Bertrand." She spoke as if of a household detergent that had proved unsatisfactory. "Why? For good?" "Yes. Do you want to hear about it? Come on. You remember me and Carol Goldsmith leaving your lecture in the middle yesterday?" Dixon understood and felt breathless. "I know. She told you something, didn't she? I know what she told you." They stopped walking involuntarily. Christine said, "You knew about Bertrand and her all the time, didn't you?" "I knew you did." She looked as if she were going to laugh. "Yes. Why didn't you tell me?" "I couldn't. It wouldn't have done me any good." "What made Carol tell you?" "She hated him for taking her for granted. She said she began by hating me as well. Then she saw the way he was treating me, and realized he was the one to blame, not me." "Bit noble of her, wasn't it? Bertrand won't look at her after this." "Oh, she doesn't want him to. I gather... well, I sort of gathered from what she said that there's someone else in the background now. I don't know who." Dixon was pretty sure he did. The last thread was untangled. He took Christine's arm and walked off with her. "That's enough," he said. A leer of happiness suffused his face. "I think you might like to hear this. I'm going to have nothing more to do with Margaret. Something's come up, never mind what for now, which means I needn't bother with her any more." "What? You mean you're absolutely—" "I'll tell you about it later, I promise. Don't let's think about it now." "All right, but it is genuine, isn't it?" "Of course. Perfectly genuine." "Tell me, what are you going to do this afternoon?" "I suppose I shall have to go back to London." "Do you mind if I come with you?" I've got to find somewhere to live." "Why? I thought you lived somewhere in this part of the world. Didn't Uncle Julius tell you about my new job?" "For goodness sake, tell me about this properly, Jim. Don't tease me." While he explained, he pronounced the names to himself: Bayswater, Knightsbridge, Notting Hill Gate, Pimlico, Belgrave Square, Wapping, Chelsea. "I knew he had something up that sleeve of his," Christine was saying. "I didn't know that'd be it, though. I hope you'll be able to put up with him. Couldn't be better, could it? I say, there won't be any difficulty about you leaving your job with the university here, will there?" "No, I don't think so." "What job is it, by the way? The one he's given you?" "The one Bertrand thought he was going to get." Christine began laughing noisily and blushing at the same time. Dixon laughed too. He thought what a pity it was that all his faces were designed to express rage or loathing. Now that something had happened which really deserved a face, he'd none to celebrate it with. As a kind of token, he made his sex life in ancient Rome face. Then he noticed something ahead of them and slowed in his walk. He nudged Christine. "What's the matter?" she asked. "See that car?" It was Welshes, parked outside a tea shop. "What's it doing there?" "He's picking up Bertrand, I suppose. Bertrand said he wasn't going to have lunch in the same house with me after what I'd said to him. Hurry up, Jim, before they come out." Just as they drew level with the shop window, the door opened and a crowd of Welshes came out and blocked the pavement. Dixon squeezed Christine's arm encouragingly and walked up to them. "Excuse me," he said in a fruity, comic butler voice. On Mrs. Welsh's face appeared an expression of imminent vomiting. Dixon inclined his head indulgently to her. The incident was almost closed when he saw that not only were Welsh and Bertrand both present, but Welsh's fishing hat and Bertrand's beret were there too. The beret, however, was on Welsh's head, the fishing hat on Bertrand's. In these guises, and standing rigid with popping eyes as both were, they had a look of being Gide and Lytton Strachey, represented in waxwork form by a prentice hand. Dixon drew in breath to denounce them both, then blew it all out again in a howl of laughter. His steps faltered, his body sagged as if it had been knifed. With Christine tugging at his arm, he halted, slowly doubling up like a man with the stitch. "You're," he said, he's... The Welshes withdrew and began getting into their car. Moaning, Dixon allowed Christine to lead him away up the street. The whinnying and clanging of Welsh's self-starter began behind them, growing fainter and fainter as they walked on until it was altogether overlaid by the other noises of the town and by their own voices.
If you've enjoyed this recording, why not try another exciting title from the Hamlyn Books on Tape range? Among over 15 available titles are Risk by Dick Francis, Wilt by Tom Sharp, and Douglas Adams' latest fantastic saga, Dirk Gently's Holistic Detective Agency. Ask for them now at your local bookshop or your usual stockist.